The night my father sold me, he smiled. Not the tight, ashamed kind of smile a man wears when he knows he's done something wrong. A real one, wide and relieved, like setting down a burden he had carried too long and was glad to finally be rid of. I was that burden. I remember standing in the hallway of our house in Seattle, still wearing my work clothes, dried clay on my knuckles from the ceramic studio where I spent 12 hours a day pretending my life was mine. The envelope was already on the table. The deal was already done. And the two men sitting across from my father, mirror images of cold, quiet devastation, hadn't even looked at me yet. I told myself not to look at them either. I failed. Before we go into the story, welcome to Yaoi Blossom Channel. Hey you, yes you. If this is your first time here, you're not here by accident. You just found your new favorite place. On this channel I bring you emotional and addictive stories, BL/M/M Omegaverse drama, heartbreaking betrayals and powerful love stories, alphas, omegas, secrets, and unexpected pregnancies, possessive kings, mafia bosses, and unforgettable characters. Every story is crafted to pull you in, break you a little, and leave you wanting more. So if you love stories that make your heart race, your eyes tear up, and keep you hooked till the end, hit that subscribe button now and join the family. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's start. My name is Seo Jaiwan. I am 24 years old. I am an Omega, and until the night everything changed, I had spent my entire life making sure neither of those facts defined me. Growing up in Seattle's Madrona neighborhood, I learned early that the world sorts people the way a machine sorts coins, by weight, by size, by what you're worth to someone else. Alphas on top, betas in the middle, omegas at the bottom, traded like property when the debts got deep enough and the pride ran out. My mother used to say I had my grandmother's eyes. Sharp and dark, the kind that saw too much and forgave too little. She died when I was 9, and after that my father started drinking and the debt started growing, and I started working before most kids my age had figured out what they wanted to be. I wanted to be a sculptor. I wanted to make things with my hands that couldn't be taken from me. Funny how life answers wants like that. I wasn't weak. I want to be clear about that. I had never begged anyone for anything. I had swallowed humiliation at school when the alpha kids called me a scent carrier, when teachers marked my presentations lower without reason, when the world quietly reminded me every day that I existed at its pleasure, not my own. I had endured all of it standing straight. But standing in that hallway, smelling the ink still fresh on whatever contract my father had signed, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Fear. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't scream. It simply settles into your chest like cold water and stays. The kind that knows it has reason to. Their names were Kwon Hyunwoo and Kwon Hyunsoo. I didn't know that yet, standing in the hallway. What I knew was the silence they carried. Heavy and deliberate, the kind that didn't happen by accident. These were men who had learned a long time ago that silence was its own kind of weapon. They were identical in the way that immediately unsettled you. Same jaw, same height, same dark hair swept back with a precision that felt almost clinical. Same black coats that probably cost more than 6 months of my studio rent combined. But the longer I stood there, the more I understood they weren't actually the same at all. The one on the left sat with his arms crossed, posture locked, expression blank. No curiosity, no discomfort. He looked at the contract on the table the way you'd look at a grocery receipt, necessary and forgettable. The one on the right had his hands flat on his knees, still, controlled. But his eyes, when they finally found me in the hallway, held something different. Not warmth, nothing as soft as that. More like recognition. Like he had expected me to be standing exactly there, already watching, already refusing to flinch. I hated that he was right. My father cleared his throat. "Juwona, come sit down." I didn't move. "What is this? Come sit down," he said again, softer now, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted. I walked into the room because walking away wasn't something I did. I sat in the empty chair across from the twins and placed my hands flat on my thighs the way my mother taught me. Composed, present, unreadable. The one on the left still hadn't looked at me directly. The one on the right hadn't looked away. My father pushed the envelope toward me. Inside was a single page. Numbers. Property transfer clause. And at the bottom, in the designated field for the subject of exchange, 3 Korean characters. My name. The Quan family has agreed to absorb my debt, my father said quietly. All of it. In exchange. In exchange for me, I said. He didn't deny it. The room went very still, and somewhere in that stillness, I felt my old life end. The apartment smelled like my father's cigarettes and the ghost of my mother's doenjang jjigae. That warm, fermented undertone she used to fill the kitchen with on Sunday mornings. The smell used to mean safety. Now it felt like irony. The twins' scent was something else entirely. Omegaverse biology is cruel in its honesty. You cannot lie to your own nose. And what hit me when I finally stopped holding my breath was a dual current, sharp and layered, like cedarwood and rain-soaked iron, something clean under something dangerous. I had never scented 2 alphas simultaneously before. I didn't know it would feel like standing between 2 opposing winds, each trying to pull you a different direction. My hands stayed flat on my thighs. My pulse, unfortunately, did not cooperate. The one on the right, I would later learn his name was Hyunsoo, shifted almost imperceptibly in his chair. A tilt of the chin, a fraction, as if he had caught something on the air and was deciding what to do with the information. I kept my face neutral. Boredom is its own armor. Outside, Seattle rain had started again, dragging its fingers down the window behind my father's head. The streetlights threw amber across the floor in long, broken lines. The whole room felt caught between 2 versions of itself, before and after, and I was the hinge. The contract page sat between us like something alive. My father's hands were shaking. I noticed that. I cataloged it the way I had cataloged everything my father did since I was old enough to understand that his instability was a weather pattern I needed to survive. Not fix, not forgive, simply survive. The twin on the left, Hyunwoo, I would learn, finally spoke. His voice was low, unhurried, stripped of anything decorative. You've read the terms? He was speaking to my father, but his tone landed on me like a verdict, and something in my chest went absolutely quiet. He hasn't read them, I said. He signed them. Hyunwoo's gaze finally moved to me, flat, measuring, the kind of look that didn't assign value, it assigned category. Then I'll explain them to you directly, he said, with the mild patience of someone who had never once been told no and had simply stopped expecting it. Please do, I said. Hyunsoo made a quiet sound. Not a laugh. Something shorter, more contained. Like amusement had been allowed a single breath and then shut back inside. Hyunwoo leaned forward slightly. You'll relocate to our residence in Portland within the week. You'll maintain the household's Omega protocols, scent registration, territory compliance, pack documentation. In return, the debt is cleared, your father retains the house, and you receive a monthly stipend. And the duration? I asked. Open-ended. That's not a contract, I said. That's a sentence. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable for them. That was the part that got under my skin. Most people, when confronted with what they're actually doing, show at least a flicker of unease. Hyunwoo showed nothing. Hyunsoo, though, the stillness in him was different. Where his brother's blankness felt like a wall, Hyunsoo's felt like a door that had been locked from the inside by someone who still stood right behind it. You're unhappy, Hyunsoo said. Not a question. I'm being sold, I said. Would you be happy? Something moved across his face then, just for a second. There and gone, like light through a shutter. No, he said quietly. I wouldn't. My father shifted in his chair. Jiwona, don't. I didn't look at him. Just don't. The rain outside picked up. The amber light on the floor shifted as a car passed. I looked down at my name on the contract. 3 characters. The name my mother chose because she said it meant to become someone. To be in the world with intention. I wondered what she would say now. I picked up the pen. My father exhaled. Relief, guilt, and cowardice all folded into one sound. I didn't give him the comfort of my eyes. I signed. The pen scratched against the paper, And I set it down cleanly, the way you put down something you refuse to let define you even as it does. Hyunwoo collected the contract without ceremony. He slid it into a slim folder. Done. Filed. Categorized. I was now, legally, in every Omegaverse sense that Seattle's district registry would recognize, a transferred ward of the Quan Pack. Hyunsoo stood. And as he did, his scent shifted barely, the kind of change only an Omega's biology would catch. A warmer undercurrent beneath the cedar and iron. Brief. Controlled almost immediately. Almost. I filed that away the same way I had filed every survival critical detail since I was 9 years old and learned the world didn't hand you warnings. Hyunwoo was already moving toward the door. Hyunsoo paused beside my chair. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak. But he looked at me. And this time, the door behind his eyes was open just enough. Just enough for me to see something there that terrified me far more than his brother's cold. I held that terror quietly, the way you hold a coal in your palm, aware of the burn, refusing to drop it. Hyunsoo moved toward the door without another word. I stood, smoothed the front of my work shirt, still carrying dried clay in the creases of my knuckles, and picked up the single bag I had packed 3 days ago, because that was the thing nobody in that room knew about me yet. I had known this was coming. Not the twins specifically. Not the contract with my name typed at the bottom like a label on a shipping crate. But the shape of it, the inevitability of my father's debt reaching a hand into my life and taking something. I had felt that coming the way you feel a storm in the pressure of the air before a single cloud appears. So I had packed. 1 bag. Clothes, my carving tools wrapped in cloth, my mother's silver ring in the inside zip pocket where it couldn't fall out, and a photograph of her I had kept hidden in a book since I was 12 because my father had a habit of selling things he forgot mattered to someone else. I was not going to Portland unprepared. My father stood at the edge of the hallway as I passed. His mouth opened. "Jiwona, lock the door when I leave," I said. "And call your sponsor. You've been drinking again. I can smell it from here." I walked out before he could find words, because there were no words. There was only the door closing behind me and the wet Seattle night opening up ahead. Rain falling in that particular Pacific Northwest way. Not dramatic, just constant, like something that had decided to outlast everything beneath it. The twins' car was parked at the curb. Black. Expensive. The kind of vehicle that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. Hyunwoo was already in the passenger seat, phone in hand, shoulders set with the rigid economy of a man who had already mentally moved on from this location and was simply waiting for his body to follow. Hyunsoo stood at the rear door and opened it as I reached the bottom step. Not a gesture of servitude. More like the absence of assumption. He didn't reach for my bag, didn't touch my arm, didn't do any of the performative alpha things I had braced for. He simply opened the door and stepped aside. I got in. He closed it behind me, walked around to the driver's side, and pulled into the street before the click of the door had finished echoing. No ceremony, no speech, just movement. I respected that more than I wanted to. The city slid past the windows in amber and gray, streetlights catching the rain and throwing it back in fractured light. Seattle at night had always looked like a painting that couldn't decide if it was beautiful or sad and had given up trying to choose. I kept my bag on my lap, both hands resting on top of it. The car smelled like them. That was the part one hadn't calculated. The enclosed space, the recycled air, the way Omegaverse biology turns proximity into a full sensory assault whether you consent to it or not. Cedarwood and rain-soaked iron. The same dual current from the apartment, but concentrated now, filling every breath I took. My secondary instincts, the ones that lived below conscious thought and operated on pure biology, started cataloging. I shut them down the way I always did. Focus. Hyunwoo hadn't looked back once. His attention was on his phone. Scrolling, typing, the blue light catching the sharp angle of his jaw. Processing the acquisition of a human being with the same energy most people reserved for approving a calendar invite. Hyunsoo drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee. His posture was relaxed in the surface way that very controlled people learn to perform, the kind of calm that takes significant effort to maintain and shows it only in the complete absence of any unnecessary movement. The silence stretched. I had grown up inside silence. My mother's absence had turned our house quiet in a way that never fully lifted, and I had learned to read silence the way other people read expressions, for what it was hiding, for what it was protecting, for what it refused to say out loud. This silence was hiding something. How long is the drive? I asked. 3 hours. Hyunsoo's voice in the enclosed space was quieter than it had been in the apartment. More textured, like the room had been giving it nowhere to land and the car was the first place it had. And the house. Estate, Hyunwoo said, without looking up from his phone. A single, flat correction. The estate, I repeated, keeping every drop of irony out of my voice. How many Omega staff currently in residence? That made Hyunwoo look up. Not at me, at his brother. A single sideways glance, brief and loaded, carrying an entire conversation between them the way twins apparently could without a single word. Hyunsoo's hands adjusted on the wheel. A subtle tell. The first one I had caught from him that he hadn't controlled in time. 2, he said. Both beta presenting. They handle the house. So I'm the first Omega transferred into the pack territory. Not a question. I already knew from the way Hyunwoo's jaw had tightened by 2 degrees. Yes, Hyunsoo said. Why? Another twin glance. Faster this time. Less clean. That's a longer conversation, Hyunsoo said. It's a 3-hour drive, I said. We have time. The rain picked up against the windshield. Hyunsoo turned the wipers up 1 setting. Hyunwoo had gone back to his phone, but the quality of his attention had changed. He wasn't reading anymore. He was listening. The pack has been closed to Omega transfers for 6 years, Hyunsoo said finally. Your situation is an exception. My father's debt made me an exception. Yes. I looked out the window at the highway opening up ahead, Seattle falling away behind us, the dark line of tree-covered hills beginning to swallow the skyline. 6 years. A closed pack. And 2 identical alphas who were definitely not telling me the full shape of what I had just signed myself into. I filed all of it. Every detail. Every gap. Because gaps were where the truth lived in my experience. The first hour passed in fragments of rain and road noise and the quiet war of 3 people pretending the situation was less complicated than it was. Somewhere past Tacoma, Hyunwoo put his phone away and tilted his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. The transition from active dismissal to sleep or the performance of sleep was so seamless it felt like a statement. You are not worth staying awake for. I let that land and leave. I had absorbed worse from better people. Hyunsoo's eyes found me in the rearview mirror. Not a check. Not the brief, obligatory glance of a driver confirming a passenger's presence. A real look, measured and quiet, carrying something that didn't match his brother's operational coldness. You're not afraid, he said. I didn't say that. You're sitting like someone who isn't afraid. I'm sitting like someone who knows fear doesn't change the road, I said. Something shifted in his reflection. Not quite a smile. The architecture of one, the way a face rearranges itself in the second before a smile decides whether or not to happen. It decided not to, but I had seen it considering, and I tucked that away too. We were somewhere in the darkness between Olympia and Portland when the first thread of something real pulled loose. Hyunsoo spoke without preamble. Eyes on the road. Voice low enough that it didn't disturb his brother's performed sleep. You knew before tonight. I didn't pretend. Yes. How long? For days. My father isn't good at hiding his relief before it's appropriate. A beat of quiet. The wipers moved. Rain shifted from a murmur to a brief, heavier pulse and then softened again. You still signed, Hyunsoo said. He would have found a worse way out if I hadn't, I said. He always does. The words sat between us without drama. That was the honest shape of my life. Not tragic, not victimized, just true. My father was a man who made catastrophic choices with consistent creativity, and I had long since accepted that loving someone didn't require you to admire their architecture. Hyunsoo was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, the stipend is real. The terms are enforceable. If the arrangement becomes untenable, there is a clause. I read the contract in the car before you arrived at the apartment, I said. I photographed it on my phone while my father was in the kitchen. I know every clause. This time the silence was different, heavier, recalibrated. In the passenger seat, Hyun breathing had changed. Still, too still for sleep. He was listening. Had been, probably, for longer than I'd realized. Smart, Hyunsoo said quietly. And the word didn't carry the condescension most alphas loaded into compliments aimed at omegas. That particular tone that turned admiration into surprise. It was just an observation. Clean and even. Necessary, I corrected. He accepted that without pushback. Outside, the first signs for Portland began appearing in the headlights. Green and white and ordinary, like this night was just a commute, like I was just a person going somewhere they had chosen. I looked at my name on the sign's reflection in the wet road below and thought, Seo Jaiwan, you are still you. Whatever this is, you are still you. Hold that. The Quans estate appeared at the end of a private road lined with Douglas firs, their shapes barely visible against the dark sky, black on black with only the car's headlights pulling their edges out of nothing. The house, estate, I reminded myself with zero sincerity, was large in the specific way that old money is large. Not showy, just permanent. Stone and dark timber, 3 stories, lights burning in 2 upper windows and the entryway. It looked like a place that had been standing long enough to have its own opinions about the people who moved through it. Hyunsoo pulled to a stop in the circular drive. Hyunwoo was out of the car before the engine cut, moving toward the front door without a backward glance. Coat collar up against the Portland rain, which was doing exactly what Seattle rain did but with slightly more intent. Hyunsoo stepped out, came around, opened my door. I got out and stood in the rain for a moment, not because I was hesitating but because I needed to feel the ground under my feet and the cold on my face and the full, physical reality of where I was before I walked through that door. This is the beginning, I told myself. Not the end. Beginnings don't get to beat you. Hyunsoo stood beside me. Not touching. Not rushing. Just present in the way that, I was already learning, was his particular mode of occupying space. The rain fell between us. The east wing is yours, he said. No one enters without your permission. That's not a courtesy. It's in the contract. I looked at him. You flagged that clause specifically. I wrote it, he said. The ground under my feet did something it had no business doing. I looked back at the house, at the lit windows, at the door Hyunwoo had already disappeared through without ceremony or welcome. Why? I asked. Hyunsoo didn't answer immediately. The rain moved between us like a third presence, patient and indifferent. Because some things should be someone's own, he said finally. He walked toward the door. I stood in the rain one more second. And then I followed, not because I had no choice, but because I had decided to. There is a difference. I needed that difference to be mine. What I didn't know yet. What I couldn't have known standing in that rain with cedar and iron still threading through every breath I took, was that somewhere in the 6 years this pack had kept its doors closed, something had happened that my contract didn't mention. Something that involved both twins. Something that was already, quietly, beginning to involve me. I carried that thought through the front door like a stone in my pocket. The entryway of the Quans estate was exactly what the outside had promised. High ceilings, dark timber beams, stone floors that had been walked on long enough to develop their own particular smoothness. Not cold, exactly. More like composed. The way a face looks when it has trained itself out of expression over many years. A single lamp burned on a console table near the staircase. Beside it, a shallow ceramic bowl held 3 smooth river stones and nothing else. My sculptors, I catalogued it automatically. Someone had placed those stones with intention. The spacing was deliberate. That kind of deliberate comes from either compulsion or care, and I hadn't been here long enough to know which. Hyunwoo was already on the stairs, coat folded over one arm, not looking back. Breakfast is at 7, he said, to the air, to no one specifically. Be presentable. The dismissal landed clean and blunt, no edge of cruelty in it, which was almost worse. Cruelty implies you register someone enough to want to wound them. Hyunwoo's tone held something more absolute. Indifference. I filed it, not as pain, as data. His footsteps reached the landing and disappeared. Hyunsoo moved past me toward a hallway branching left off the entryway. I'll show you the east wing. I followed him through a corridor that ran the length of the house's ground floor, passing a closed kitchen, a sitting room with low furniture and a fireplace that had been used recently. Ash still pale at the edges, and 2 more closed doors I mentally marked as unknown territory to map later. The east wing began through a separate door, heavier than the others with a different handle. Older hardware. The door opened into a short hall with 3 rooms branching off it. Hyunsoo pushed open the first door. The room inside was large and quiet. A bed with dark linen. A desk along the window wall. A standing shelf. Empty. Tall windows facing a garden I couldn't see clearly in the dark, only the suggestion of it. Shapes of hedges and something that might have been a stone path. No decoration. Nothing personal. But nothing hostile either. A blank page. I had worked with worse materials. Bathroom through there, Hyunsoo said, nodding toward a door on the left wall. The shelf in the hall outside has extra linen. The heat is controlled from the panel by the window. Okay, I said. He stayed in the doorway, not crowding the space, just present. Are you hungry? He asked. The question was so ordinary after everything that had happened in the last 3 hours that it almost caught me off guard. Almost. No, I said. He nodded once, accepted it without pressing, the way someone does when they have learned not to push at closed doors but haven't stopped noticing they're closed. I set my bag on the desk and turned to face him fully. I want to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Your brother, I said. He's not just cold. He's decided something about me already. I want to know what. Hyunsoo's expression didn't change dramatically, but something in his posture shifted. A very slight reorientation. Like a compass needle when something magnetic enters the room. Hyunwoo makes decisions quickly, he said. It's not personal. It felt personal, I said. The way nothing feels personal when it actually is. The silence between us stretched in a particular direction. The kind of silence that is deciding something. He didn't want an Omega in the house, Hyunsoo said finally. I overruled him. I sat with that for a moment. You overruled your alpha twin to bring me here. On a debt deal. At your family's negotiation. Why? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. Not calculating. Not performing consideration. Actually in it. Because the alternative was worse, he said. And before I could pull that apart, ask what alternative, what worse, what any of it actually meant, he stepped back from the doorway. Get some rest, Jawansi. The door closed, and I stood in the middle of that blank, quiet room with the sound of Portland rain against the windows and the taste of an incomplete answer sitting in my mouth like something I was going to have to chew on for a very long time. I didn't sleep. That wasn't surprising. I never slept well in new spaces. My body ran a security sweep first, cataloging exits, sound patterns, the particular Creek language of an unfamiliar building, until it satisfied itself that I understood the environment well enough to lower my guard. So instead I unpacked. Methodically, quietly, the way I did everything when I needed to feel like I had agency over at least the immediate square footage of my life. Clothes on the shelf. Carving tools on the desk in their cloth roll, each tool in its own loop, handles outward. My mother's ring on the desk beside them. Not on my finger, not yet, but visible. Present. The photograph I tucked into the inner frame of the shelf where it would catch the morning light but not be the first thing visible to anyone who opened the door. Mine. Still mine. The rain shifted against the windows. The estate settled around me in its night sounds. The low hum of the heating system. A pipe somewhere talking to itself. The distant creak of the staircase that old houses make when the temperature drops. And then another sound. Voices. Low, coming through the wall that separated the east wing from the main house. Not the words, the walls were too solid for that, but the cadence. 2 voices. The shape of an argument being held at controlled volume by 2 people who had long practice at arguing without the house knowing. I pressed nothing to the wall. I was not that kind of person, but I stood very still and listened to the shape of it. It lasted for minutes. I counted. Then silence. Then a single door closing somewhere in the upper house with more force than necessary. Not a slam, but close. The The fracture between them was older than tonight. I had walked into the middle of something that had been building for years, and my contract, with its tidy clauses and monthly stipend, hadn't mentioned a single word of it. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. Clay still in the knuckle creases. I hadn't washed it off. My grandmother's eyes, sharp and dark, seeing too much. See it then, I told myself. See all of it. That's how you stay ahead. Morning arrived without announcement. The east wing windows faced east, obviously deliberately, and the first light came in low and gray gold through the garden shapes I hadn't been able to read in the dark. In daylight, the garden was structured and slightly overgrown, the kind that had been formally designed and then left to develop its own opinions. Stone paths, a Japanese maple near the far wall, bare-branched in the late autumn cold. A stone bench with lichen working its patient way across the seat. Someone had loved that garden once and then stopped tending it. I was dressed and at the kitchen door at 6:58. Be presentable, Hyunsoo had said. I am. I am also 2 minutes early, which communicates something different than on time does, and I needed him to receive that communication clearly. The kitchen was large, well-equipped, and currently occupied by a man in his late 30s moving between the stove and the counter with the practiced efficiency of someone who genuinely enjoyed this particular form of order. He was beta presenting. The scent signature was mild, warm, no aggression in it, with close-cropped hair and the kind of calm that came from choosing it every morning. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway. His expression carried mild surprise, then settled into something welcoming. You must be Seo Jawansi, he said. I'm Park Juno. I manage the household. A small, respectful nod. Coffee is ready. Breakfast in 10 minutes. Thank you, I said. Can I help? He blinked. Recalibrated slightly. That's no, please sit. It's handled. I sat. But I watched. Because a household manager tells you more about the people who run the house than almost anyone else in it. The small choices, what's stocked, what's prepared, the temperature the kitchen is kept at in the morning. All of it speaks. The kitchen was stocked with precision. Nothing excessive, nothing sparse. The coffee was Korean-style drip, not American. There were 2 types of rice in the cooker, one already done. The side dishes being arranged on the counter. Kimchi, braised black beans, a soft egg dish, spoke of someone who understood that a proper Korean breakfast wasn't a habit. It was a form of care. Juno prepared this every morning. For whom? Before I could follow that thread, the kitchen door opened and Hyunsoo walked in. He had changed from last night. Dark slacks, a slate gray knit that sat close to his shoulders, the kind of clothing that made no effort to impress and landed there anyway. His hair was slightly damp. Eyes clear, alert, carrying none of the softened edge quality that most people's faces hold in the first minutes of a morning. He looked like someone who had been awake for hours and had stopped pretending sleep was something he did reliably. His eyes found me immediately. You're early, he said. I'm precise, I said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite the smile architecture I had seen the night before. Smaller, more involuntary. He moved to the counter, poured coffee, and sat down across the table from me with the ease of someone who occupied this particular chair every morning and had no complicated feelings about it. But his scent told a different story. That warmer undercurrent I had caught last night, the one beneath the cedar and iron, was present again. Slightly more open in the morning air, less compressed by the control he maintained in more charged situations. It smelled like the moment before rain commits, like held breath, like something waiting to be decided. My biology cataloged it before I could tell it not to. I redirected my attention to the coffee. Where is your brother? I asked. Running, Hyunsoo said. He runs 6 miles every morning. He'll be back by 7:15. And then he'll come in, eat in 4 minutes and leave for the office. A pause. He's easier to manage in motion. The word manage sat in the air between us with an interesting weight. Not casual, not quite careful either. You manage him, I said. We manage each other, Hyunsoo said. It's what twins do when the other options are worse. There it was again. That word. Worse. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and looked at him directly. You said last night that the alternative to bringing me here was worse. I've been sitting with that since midnight. He met my eyes. Didn't look away, didn't deflect. I know, he said. Are you going to tell me what it means? The kitchen held the sounds of Juno moving quietly between counter and stove, the soft percussion of a household morning. Rain still light against the windows. Hyunsoo looked at his coffee, then back at me. When you've been here long enough to know which information is safe to carry, he said quietly. I'll tell you everything. When you've been here long enough. Not if. When. I held that word in the same place I held the stone weight of his scent and the 4-minute argument through the wall and the 6 years of closed packed doors. When. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in years. Not because it gave me answers, but because it admitted there were some. The back door opened. Hyunwoo came in from his run. He was breathing controlled, body moving with the disciplined ease of someone who pushed physical limits as a form of regulation rather than recreation. Hair damp with rain and sweat. Dark eyes sweeping the kitchen in one clean pass. Juno, the table, me. His stride didn't break. He went to the sink, filled a glass, drank it standing with his back to the room. Juno set a plate at his usual spot without being asked. The efficiency of a long-established routine. Hyunwoo turned, sat, began eating. His eyes came up once and landed on me with the flat precision of someone recategorizing my presence from expected abstraction to actual physical reality. You read the contract before we arrived, he said. Not a question. His brother had told him. Yes, I said. And you signed anyway? Yes. He studied me the way you study a structural element you're not sure you can trust. Why? He asked. Because I don't run from situations I can navigate, I said. And because your pack needed an omega badly enough to absorb a significant debt for one. That tells me I have more leverage here than the contract implies. The kitchen went very quiet. Juno found something requiring close attention on the far counter. Hyunsoo was perfectly still. Hyunwoo set his chopsticks down. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression that was doing something new. Not indifference, not assessment. Something that had to move through several locked internal rooms before it reached his face. You're either very smart, he said slowly, or very reckless. I'm both, I said. It's more efficient. And the silence that followed was a different kind than any I had heard from him yet. Not dismissal, recalibration. And in my peripheral vision, Hyunsoo's hand had gone completely still around his coffee mug. Like a man who had just watched something he hoped for and feared in equal measure begin to actually happen. The breakfast table held that silence for exactly 3 seconds. Then Hyunwoo picked his chopsticks back up, finished eating in the 4 minutes his brother had predicted, stood, and left the kitchen without another word. His plate was clean, his coffee untouched. The door to the hallway closed behind him with the quiet finality of a period at the end of a sentence that had decided it was done. Juno released a breath he had been holding since my leverage comment and resumed wiping down the counter with the focused dedication of a man who had learned that the Quan kitchen table was not a safe place to have a face. Hyunsoo looked at me. I looked back. That was either very brave or very deliberate, he said. Can't it be both? With Hyunwoo, he said carefully. Deliberate is the more dangerous choice. Good, I said. Dangerous means he's paying attention. I'd rather be a problem he has to think about than furniture he walks past. Hyunsoo was quiet for a moment. Then, with that almost smile that kept threatening to become a real one. He's going to be difficult about this. He was already difficult, I said. At least now it's a conversation. That landed somewhere in Hyunsoo that he didn't let show fully. But I saw the edges of it. The way a person looks when someone else has just articulated something they've been carrying alone for a long time. He stood, collected his cup, and paused at the counter. The estate has a workroom on the ground floor, he said. East side, past your wing. It was used as a pottery studio about 8 years ago. It hasn't been touched since. I went very still. The equipment is still there, he continued, not looking at me. Rinsing his cup with the careful attention of someone delivering significant information through the side door of an ordinary action. I don't know the condition, But if you need a space to work, it's yours. He set the cup in the rack. Juno can show you where the key is. And then he walked out, and I sat in the kitchen with my coffee and the sound of rain and the very deliberate image of a man who had read my contract carefully enough to know I was a sculptor and had quietly prepared a room for me before I arrived. Before I arrived, I pressed my thumbnail into my palm under the table. Not hard, just enough to feel something solid and real. Because that kind of careful attention, delivered without announcement or expectation of gratitude, was the most unsettling thing anyone had done for me in years. And I could not afford to be unsettled. Not here. Not yet. Juno showed me the workroom key without ceremony, pulling it from a hook in the utility corridor with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who had been told to expect this request. The key was old, heavy, the kind with actual teeth rather than the flat electronic kind, which meant the lock it belonged to had been on that door for decades. I took it down the east corridor alone. The workroom door was at the far end, slightly set back from the hall, with a transom window above it that let in a bar of gray morning light. I put the key in the lock and felt the mechanism turn with the particular resistance of something that had been resting a long time and needed a moment to remember what it was for. The door opened. The smell hit me first. Old clay, mineral and cold, and underneath it, layered in the way that only years of consistent use creates, the ghost of someone's specific creative life, the particular mixture of effort and focus and time that soaks into the walls of a working studio like a second coat of paint. Someone had spent serious years in this room. The equipment was exactly as Hyunsoo had described. Still there, untouched. A wedging table against the far wall, surface stained and worn smooth in the center the way only real use accomplishes. A kick wheel near the window, the foot pedal worn to a particular shine at the toe. 2 large shelving units with empty wire racks. A kiln in the back corner, its door sealed. Everything covered in a fine, settled layer of dust that spoke of careful abandonment rather than careless neglect. Someone had closed this room gently. I walked to the wedging table and ran my fingers across the surface. The dust moved. Under it, the clay stains were deep in the wood grain, permanent, the record of hundreds of hours of work pressed into the material itself. I looked at the wheel. I looked at the kiln. I looked at the window, which faced the same garden as my bedroom but from a lower angle, the Japanese maple visible from here at a different perspective, its bare branches making their particular winter geometry against the gray sky. 8 years. Hyunsoo had said that IT hasn't been touched since. Who worked here? Who closed it? And why does a room this carefully assembled just stop? I filed the questions. Then I took off my jacket, hung it on the hook beside the door, rolled my sleeves to the elbow and started cleaning. Because whatever this room had been before, it was mine now. And I had never once walked into a space and left it the way I found it. I was an hour into clearing the shelving units when I heard the door. Not a knock. The particular sound of a door being opened by someone who owns the building and is not accustomed to reconsidering that fact, followed immediately by the very specific quality of silence that happens when someone expected an empty room and found it occupied. I didn't turn around. The shelving brackets on the left unit are loose, I said. If anyone was planning to load these racks, they'd need to be refastened first. A pause. How did you know it was me? Hyunwoo said. Not a question. The flat cadence of someone recalibrating again. Your footstep pattern, I said, pulling a dusty wire rack free and setting it against the wall. Your brother's right foot lands slightly quieter than his left. Yours is even. Military or serious athletic training. Another pause. Longer. Taekwondo, he said. 15 years. Consistent. I moved to the next rack. What do you need? The question landed differently than he expected. I could tell from the half-second delay before he spoke. This room is off the main circuit for the estate security system, he said. I need to run a secondary sensor line through the east corridor. It will require access to the workroom for approximately 40 minutes. I turned around then. He was standing in the doorway in a charcoal suit that sat on his shoulders like it had been assembled specifically for them, holding a small technical kit with the clean grip of someone who did his own security work and didn't explain why to anyone. His eyes moved across the room. The cleared shelves. My jacket on the hook. The wheel with its foot pedal dust wiped clean. Something crossed his face too fast for me to fully catalog. I'm not stopping you, I said. Work where you need to. He came in. The workroom, generous by studio standards, became immediately smaller. Not because he was physically imposing, though he was, but because Hyunwoo carried a field of compressed energy that had nowhere to go in enclosed spaces. Everything around him felt the pressure of his presence and rearranged itself accordingly. I did not rearrange. I went back to the shelving unit and continued what I was doing, tracking him in my peripheral vision as he moved to the far wall, opened a small access panel near the floor, and began working with the focused economy of someone who genuinely knew what he was doing. 10 minutes passed. The rain outside made its steady argument against the window. You studied Omegaverse biology, Hyunwoo said, not looking up from the panel. I studied everything, I said. Biology, pack law, contract terms, suppression management, scent masking, secondary designation rights under Oregon State Code. I pulled the last rack free. I've been in Omega my entire life. Studying it wasn't academic. It was survival. A beat. Most Omegas in transfer situations don't know Oregon State Code, he said. Most Omegas in transfer situations weren't planning their own, I said. He looked up from the panel then. Full attention. Unguarded in a way I hadn't seen from him yet. The operational blankness momentarily offline, something more human running underneath it. You engineered this, he said. I accepted the terms of a situation my father created, I said. But yes, once I knew it was coming, I made sure I came in with every advantage available to me. Hyunwoo studied me with that same structural assessment quality from breakfast, but it had shifted axis. Before, he was evaluating whether I was a risk. Now he was evaluating something that didn't have a clean category in whatever filing system he used for people. Why tell me that, he said. Because you already know, I said. And I don't perform ignorance for people who aren't fooled by it. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. And in it, something in Hyunwoo's posture changed by a single significant degree. Not warmth. He was nowhere near warmth. But the wall had a door in it now. And he had just, without meaning to, let me see where it was. He finished the sensor line in 38 minutes. Packed his kit. Stood. Looked at the wheel for a moment. The way you look at something that is making you remember something you decided not to remember. The kiln is functional, he said. I had it serviced 2 years ago. 2 years ago, when the room had been closed for 6. He serviced a kiln in a room no one was using. Why? I asked. He picked up his kit. In case it was needed, he said, and walked out. I stood in the middle of the workroom with dust on my forearms and the taste of an incomplete sentence in my mouth and the absolute conviction that the kiln, the serviced kiln in the closed room of the closed pack, was not a coincidence. Nothing in this house was a coincidence. Everything had been arranged by someone. And the question pulling at the edges of every answer I collected was, arranged for what? I turned back to the shelving unit. I refastened the loose bracket with a tool from my carving kit. I was going to need this room functional, because whatever was coming in this house, I intended to be building something when it arrived. The rain had not let up by the time Juno appeared in the workroom doorway with a covered tray and the expression of a man carrying out instructions he found interesting. Jawansi, he said. Lunch. I looked up from the wheel I had been carefully examining for mechanical integrity. He sent you. Juno's expression remained respectful and perfectly neutral. I was asked to bring this. Which one? A pause that was itself an answer. Hyunsoo, he said. I looked at the tray. Juno lifted the cover. Rice, doenjang jjigae, and a small dish of the braised black beans from breakfast that I hadn't taken enough of and had not mentioned to anyone. He had noticed. Of course he had. I set down my tool. Junhasi, I said. How long have you worked for the Quan family? He set the tray on the cleared end of the wedging table. 11 years. Then you were here 6 years ago when the pack closed. The quality of his stillness was practiced. Not uncomfortable, experienced. The stillness of someone who has been asked about things he knows how to not quite answer. I was, he said. What happened? I asked. He smoothed the edge of the tray cloth with 2 fingers. A small, composing gesture. "That's not mine to tell, Juwonsi," he said quietly. But his eyes, briefly, moved to the kiln in the back corner. Then back to me. And then he left. I looked at the kiln. Black and sealed and serviced 2 years ago for no stated reason. My sculptor's instinct, the part that read objects the way other people read faces, said, this room didn't close because someone stopped working. It closed because someone left. And the question the whole house seemed to be arranged around, the question in Hyunsoo's careful door clause and Hyun was serviced kiln and the 4-minute argument through the wall and 6 years of closed pack borders, was not what happened. It was who. The answer came 40 minutes later. Not from a person. From a photograph. I found it at the back of the lowest shelf on the right unit, flat against the wall, hidden not deliberately but in the way things get hidden when a room is closed fast and the person closing it can't decide whether to take everything or leave everything and ends up doing neither. A small framed photograph. 5 inches by 7. The glass dusty but the image beneath it clear enough. 2 young men. Identical. 17, maybe 18, standing in this room, recognizable from the window angle and the wedging table behind them. Both in clay-stained clothes, both caught mid-laugh at something outside the frame, the unself-conscious kind of laugh that only happens when no one is performing for anyone. Between them, slightly shorter, 1 hand on each of their shoulders, a young man with my grandmother's kind of eyes, sharp and dark and seeing too much, grinning at whoever was behind the camera with the specific grin of someone who knows exactly where they belong. I turned the frame over. On the back, in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper the way urgent things get written, Hyunwoo, J. Hyunsoo, Portland, 2016. I stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. J. There had been a 3rd person in this pack. Someone who worked in this room. Someone the twins laughed with like that. Like the unguarded, unperformative laugh of people who love each other without complication. Someone who was gone, and whose absence had apparently closed an entire pack's borders for 6 years. And whose studio I was now standing in. Cleaning. Claiming. I set the photograph back exactly where I found it. Sat down on the stool beside the wheel. And understood, with the particular clarity that comes when enough pieces finally achieve a shape, that I had not been brought here to fill a contractual omega role in a pack that needed one. I had been brought here because I reminded them of someone. And the question that followed that realization, the one that hit me somewhere behind the sternum with the force of something falling from a significant height, was this: did they know it? Or had I just discovered something neither twin had admitted to themselves yet? I sat with that question long enough for my lunch to go cold. Then I ate it anyway. Cold doenjang jjigae still tastes like someone cared enough to make it, and I was not in the habit of wasting either food or the intention behind it. I ate at the wedging table with the photograph still at the back of the shelf where I had replaced it, present in the room the way an undetonated thing is present. Not actively dangerous, just requiring respect for its potential. J. The name sat in my mind with weight. 1 syllable. Korean, gender-neutral, the kind of name parents choose when they want something clean and strong and open to whoever the child becomes. Someone had stood between the Quan twins in this room and laughed like he owned the space between them. And then he was gone. And the pack closed. And the kiln got serviced 2 years ago by a man who presented as someone who had moved on. Nobody services a dead person's kiln if they've moved on. I finished eating, stacked the tray neatly, and made a decision. I was going to find out who Jay was. Not because it was my business. Not because the answer would be comfortable. But because I was living inside the shape of his absence without knowing it, and that made it my business in the most fundamental way possible. The way survival always makes things your business whether you chose them or not. I stood up, wiped my hands, and walked out of the workroom. The photograph stayed on the shelf. But the name came with me. Juno was in the utility corridor refilling the linen shelf when I found him. He looked up with the measured calm of a man who had learned that the people in this house had a way of arriving in hallways with questions that required careful handling. Jay, I said. No preamble. No softening. I watched his face the way I watched the wedging table surface earlier, for what had been pressed into it over time. Juno's hands went still on the folded towel he was holding. Juwonsi, he said quietly. I found the photograph. I said. I'm not asking you to betray anyone. I'm asking you to tell me what I'm walking around in the middle of without a map. He looked at the towel in his hands for a long moment. The particular look of someone weighing loyalty against the practical reality that uninformed people in complicated situations tend to make things worse for everyone. He was their Omega, Juno said finally. The words came out with the careful weight of something that had been kept precise through years of not saying it carelessly. Pack bonded. To both of them. The corridor went very still. A bonded Omega. To both twins simultaneously. A dual alpha pack bond, rare, legally complex, and in Omegaverse terms, the kind of connection that doesn't just shape a pack. It defines it. What happened to him? I asked. Juno set the towel down on the shelf. He left, he said. 3 years into the bond. He walked out of this house with one bag and did not come back. One bag. The same way I had arrived. The parallel hit me somewhere physical, below thought, the place where the body understands things before the mind catches up. Why? I asked. Juno's expression did something complicated. Not evasion, actual grief. The second-hand kind that comes from watching people you care about destroy something irreplaceable and being unable to stop it. Because Hyunwoo never claimed him, he said. 3 years inside a pack bond and Hyunwoo never marked him. Never acknowledged the bond publicly. Never, he stopped. Steadied. Hyunsoo marked him in the first year. That bond was real and full and declared. But Hyunwoo kept his distance and his silence and his reasons to himself. And eventually Jae stopped waiting for an answer to a question Hyunwoo refused to hear. The heating system hummed through the walls. Rain moved against the corridor window. Hyunsoo marked him. Hyunwoo didn't. And the pack closed 6 years ago. Which meant Jae left 6 years ago. Which meant the day the borders closed was the day he walked out. Does Hyunsoo know where he is? I asked. No, Juno said. Jae cut contact entirely. Both of them. He picked the towel back up, something to do with his hands. Hyunsoo spent 2 years trying to find him. Hyunwoo. A pause. Hyunwoo never said a word about it to anyone. Not once. In 6 years. I thought about the 4-minute argument through the wall last night. The shape of it. 2 voices. Controlled volume. Long practice. They're still fighting about it. I said. They never stopped, Juno said quietly. It is the only thing they fight about. He looked at me then with the direct, careful eyes of a man delivering the last piece. When Hyunsoo proposed acquiring your contract, he said. Hyunwoo refused for 6 weeks. They argued every night. And then one morning Hyunwoo came downstairs and said yes. And he never explained why. A beat. He hasn't explained it since. I stood in that corridor and felt the full architecture of what I had walked in to settle around me like a building finding its foundation. I was not a replacement. I refused that framing with every fiber of my identity. But I was here because something about my file, my name, my work, something had reached through 6 years of locked doors and moved a man who apparently moved for nothing. And I needed to know what. I found Hyunsoo in the sitting room. He was standing at the window that faced the front drive, hands in his pockets, watching the rain with the focused stillness of someone not actually watching the rain. The fire in the grate behind him was low and orange, throwing soft light across the side of his face, catching the angle of his jaw and the line of his shoulder. He heard me come in and didn't turn immediately. When he did, his eyes read my face in one pass and knew. Not suspicion. Recognition. The look of someone who had been waiting for a particular conversation to arrive, and was neither relieved nor afraid that it finally had. You found something, he said. A photograph, I said. And then Juno. He absorbed that without reaction. Then he moved from the window and sat in the chair closest to the fire, an invitation in the gesture without it being stated as one. I sat across from him. The fire between us was the only warm thing in the room. Tell me about Jae, I said. Hyunsoo looked at the fire for a moment. His hands rested on his knees, very still, the way they went still when he was managing something internal that required most of his available resources. His full name was Oh Jae-hyun, he said. We met him at a PAC integration seminar in Portland. He was 22, presenting Omega, just past his first heat cycle, newly registered with the district. A pause. He walked into that room and both of us scented him at the same moment. Dual scent recognition. Simultaneous. The rarest and most destabilizing event in Omegaverse biology, when two alphas identify the same Omega as a potential bond match in the same breath. That must have been complicated, I said. It was clarifying, Hyunsoo said quietly. At first, he was not afraid of us. Most Omegas, encountering two alpha scent pulls simultaneously, go into distress. Jay stood there and looked at us both and said, "Well, this is inconvenient," and then asked if either of us knew where the coffee was. Something moved in my chest without my permission. He sounds like someone who didn't perform fear for people who weren't owed it, I said. Hyunsoo's eyes came up to mine, held there. Yes, he said, and the word carried a weight that had nothing to do with past tense. Exactly like that. I felt the comparison land between us and I did not look away from it. I was not Jay. I was Seo Jaiwan and I had never been anyone else and I was not going to let grief for a stranger reshape me into a space someone else had left behind. But I also understood, sitting across from Hyunsoo with the fire between us, that the reason I was in this house might be the most painful kind of reason there is, not malice, not transaction, but the particular desperate hope of people who have lost something irreplaceable trying to believe the world still contains the shape of it somewhere. He stayed 3 years, I said. He stayed 3 years, Hyunsoo confirmed. And they were, he stopped, started again more carefully. They were real. Whatever you're thinking about what this house was during that time, it was real. He was happy. We were. The pack was whole in a way that neither of us had understood was possible until it existed. And Hyunwoo, I said. The fire cracked softly. Hyunsoo was quiet for a moment that had texture to it. The weight of something he had carried in his own body for 6 years without finding a place to set it down. Hyunwoo loved him, he said. I want you to understand that. Whatever his silence looked like from the outside, it was not absence of feeling. It was, my brother processes love the way some people process fear. By going very still. By building walls around it to protect it and then forgetting to tell the person inside the wall that the wall was protection, not rejection. And Jay read the silence as rejection, I said. Jay waited 3 years for Hyunwoo to mark him, Hyunsoo said. 3 years of watching me carry a bond openly that his other alpha wouldn't acknowledge. 3 years of sleeping in a pack house where one person in the bond was fully present and one was. His jaw tightened slightly, architecturally absent, and Jay was strong. He was not the kind of person who crumbled. He endured it with a grace that. He exhaled slowly, that I should have done more to address. Earlier, before it became a verdict. He left, I said. He left on a Tuesday, Hyunsoo said. Juno drove him to the bus station because Jay asked him to and he couldn't say no to Jay. Neither of us could. Hyunwoo was at the office. He came home and the room was. A long pause. Jay was a sculptor. The studio was empty. And Hyunwoo walked into that room and stood in it for 40 minutes without coming out. The image landed in me like something physical. Hyunwoo, standing in this room. 40 minutes of silence in the studio of the person he loved and couldn't find words for until the words had somewhere to go and no one to receive them. I looked at my own hands. Clay still in the creases. He serviced the kiln, I said. 2 years ago. Yes, Hyunsoo said. Why? Hyunsoo looked at me with the steadiest gaze I had received from anyone in this house. Because giving up felt worse, he said. Even after 6 years. Even without contact or direction or any reasonable evidence that it mattered. He paused. Hyunwoo does not know how to stop caring about something. He only knows how to be silent about it. I sat with the full weight of that. A man who loved someone so thoroughly that 6 years later, he maintained a kiln in an empty room on the off chance that love still had somewhere to go. A man whose silence had cost him everything and had apparently not taught him a different language. I thought I understood Hyunwoo's structural assessment stare now. It wasn't indifference. It was terror. The terror of someone who had already watched love walk out the door with one bag and knew exactly how much of it was his fault. "Why did you tell me this?" I asked. Hyunsoo looked at the fire. "Because you were going to find out," he said. "And I would rather you find out from me with context than piece it together alone and reach the wrong conclusion." "What's the wrong conclusion?" I asked. "That you were brought here as a substitute," he said, and his voice carried a precision that came from having apparently had this argument with himself many times. "You weren't. Jay was Jay. You are—" He paused. "You are Seo Jaiwon, who photographed a contract on his phone and signed it anyway and walked into a strange house and cleaned a closed studio and told my brother he was providing leverage before 8 in the morning." Something in his voice shifted. "You are not a substitute for anyone. I need you to know that I know that." The fire made its small sounds. I let the words settle into the places in me that needed to hear them and the places that were going to stay guarded regardless. "I'm not afraid of being compared to a ghost," I said. "I'm afraid of being managed by one without my knowledge. That's why I needed the information." "Fair," he said. "There's something else," I said. He waited. "Hyunwoo agreed to this arrangement," I said. 6 weeks of refusal, and then one morning he said yes. Juno told me. "And you haven't told me why." Hyunsoo's hands on his knees shifted slightly. "No," he said. "I haven't." "Do you know why?" I asked. And here was where I saw it. The first fully unguarded moment from Hyunsoo since the drive from Seattle. The door behind his eyes opened, not by choice, but because the question had found the exact hinge. "I know what he said to me that morning," Hyunsoo said quietly. "He came downstairs and he said, 'Find someone who won't wait for permission to matter.' And then he approved the contract. 'Find someone who won't wait for permission to matter.'" The words moved through me like something with temperature. Because Hyunwoo had looked at my file. My stubborn, overqualified, Omega Rights literate, ceramic studio file. And seen someone who would walk into his house and clean his dead Omega studio and tell him he was leverage before breakfast. And he had said yes. Not because I was a replacement. Because I was the opposite of one. Because Jay had waited. And Hyunwoo, in the 6 years of silence since, had apparently decided that the worst thing he could do to another person was create a space where waiting felt necessary. I looked at Hyunsoo. He looked back. And in the space between us, the fire low and the rain still moving against the windows and the name Jay hanging in the air like a third presence in the room, something shifted in the architecture of what we were to each other. Not close, not resolved, nothing so neat as that, but honest. And honest, in my experience, is where everything real either begins or finally, completely ends. The sitting room door opened. Hyunwoo stood in the frame. He had changed out of the charcoal suit. Dark slacks, a black sweater, the collar slightly pulled, like he had put it on without looking in a mirror and had not subsequently cared. He looked at his brother. He looked at me. He read the room in one pass the way he read everything. Fast, complete, and without showing what the reading cost him. His eyes dropped to my hands. The clay in the creases. Something moved through his face so quickly that I almost missed it. Almost. It was not calculation. It was not assessment. It was recognition. Raw and unwilling and real. He looked at Hyunsoo. One beat of twin communication, silent and complete. Then he looked back at me. "The sensor line in the workroom," he said. "I ran it incorrectly. I need to correct it." The sensor line he had spent 38 minutes on with the focused precision of someone who definitely did not run things incorrectly. "Of course," I said. My voice was level and uninflected and gave him absolutely nothing to react to. He held my gaze for one more second. Then he turned and walked down the corridor. And I sat in the firelight with the truth between my ribs like a coal held in a palm. The man who had serviced a kiln for 6 years had just invented a reason to go back to the studio. And the question I had no answer to yet, the one that was going to determine everything about what happened in this house, was whether he was going there to grieve what he had lost, or to figure out what he was looking at now. I gave him 4 minutes. Not because I was counting, I was absolutely counting, but because 4 minutes felt like the right amount of time for a man to stand in a room with his ghost before the ghost became less important than the present. Then I stood up. Hyunsoo's eyes followed me from the chair across the fire. "Jiwansi," he said. Not a warning. Not a request. Just my name, carrying everything he couldn't quite frame as a sentence. "I'm not going to hurt him," I said. "I'm going to go work." I left him with the fire. The workroom door was open. Not wide. The careful few inches of someone who needed air but hadn't decided on company. I pushed it the rest of the way and walked in without ceremony because ceremony was its own kind of performance and I was done performing tonight. Hyunwoo was standing at the window. Not at the access panel. Not with his technical kit. At the window, hands loose at his sides, looking out at the garden where the rain had finally softened to a mist that turned the Japanese maple into something watercolor and imprecise against the dark. He didn't turn when I came in. I went to the wheel, sat on the stool, settled my feet, and checked the pedal resistance with one slow press. Functional. The mechanism moved with a slight catch at the top of the rotation that I could work around or eventually fix. I chose to work around it for now, because some catches you adjust to before you correct them. Because forcing a correction before you understand the mechanism breaks more than it fixes. I reached for the clay I had found in the sealed supply cabinet during my morning clean. 2 bags, dried at the edges but workable in the center, the kind of material that had been waiting long enough that it needed significant effort before it would cooperate. I broke a section off, began wedging it against the table surface. The motion is repetitive and physical and honest. Pressing the heels of your palms into the clay, folding it, rotating it, pressing again, removing air pockets, aligning the grain, making it ready for something. The sound of it filled the room. That particular rhythmic compression, clay against wood, steady and unromantic and real. Hyunwoo turned from the window. He watched me work for a moment with an expression that had stopped pretending to be something manageable. "You know what you're doing," he said. "I've been doing it since I was 14, I said. "My mother's friend had a studio. She let me use it after school." I kept wedging. The clay was coming around, losing its resistance, becoming something that might cooperate. "It was the one place," I said, not planning to say it, the words arriving because the motion of the work had opened something, "where my designation didn't come first." She didn't see an omega when I walked in. She saw someone who needed to make things. I turned the clay, pressed again. That's a rarer thing than it should be. The room held the sound of rain and clay and 2 people deciding how honest to be in the dark. Hyunwoo moved from the window. He didn't come to the wheel. He went to the wedging table, pulled the stool from beneath it, and sat down with his forearms resting on his knees, close enough to be present, far enough to be deliberate about not crowding the space. He was learning already, the geometry of giving someone room. I noticed. I filed it. "I owe you a direct conversation," he said. "You owe me several," I said. "But I'll take one." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite the structural assessment stare. More interior than that. "I was difficult this morning," he said. "You were honest this morning," I said. "Difficult and honest aren't the same thing. I'd rather have honest. I told you that you were either very smart or very reckless. You did." "I was," he said carefully, attempting to categorize something I didn't have a category for. I lifted the clay and slapped it back against the table with enough force to knock the last air pockets out. The sound was sharp and definitive in the quiet room. "I don't fit in categories," I said. "I've noticed that tends to bother people who organize the world that way." "It doesn't bother me," he said. I looked up. He met my eyes with a steadiness that was different from his operational blankness. That blankness was a wall. This was a man standing on the other side of one, looking through it, deciding whether the architecture of his own construction was worth maintaining. "It interests me," he said. "That's what I haven't known how to say." The wedging table between us. The clay in my hands. The rain outside going soft and insistent. And Kwon Hyunwoo, who had not explained himself to anyone in 6 years, choosing this room and this moment and this particular form of inadequate vocabulary to try. I set the clay down. "Then say that," I said, "instead of running censor lines that don't need correcting." The silence that followed was the first one I had heard from him that wasn't a wall or a weapon or a filing mechanism. It was just a man, caught, with nothing left to hide behind except the truth. The sensor line was fine, he said. I know, I said. I needed to, he stopped. His jaw tightened slightly, the physical reflex of someone whose vocabulary for interiority is genuinely underdeveloped. Not because they're unintelligent, but because they have spent years making sure they didn't need it. I needed to see the room with someone in it. Oh, that landed somewhere deep. Not because it was romantic. Because it was honest in the specific way that costs something. The kind of honesty that doesn't perform vulnerability but simply arrives at it because there's no other route left. He needed to see the room with someone in it. 6 years of a closed studio. A serviced kiln. 3 smooth stones in a bowl by the stairs placed with the care of someone who had run out of other ways to tend to something. And 1 man standing at the window in the dark. Not haunting the space but trying to determine if it could become something other than a museum. Does it? I asked quietly. Help? Seeing it with someone in it? He looked around the room. The cleared shelves. My jacket on the hook. The clay on the wedging table. The wheel with its worn pedal. Yes, he said. And the word was so unguarded that I think it surprised him. I let it sit without comment. Because some things need to breathe before they need to be discussed. I centered the clay on the wheel. It's the most technically demanding part of the process. Getting the mass to spin true, finding the center by feel rather than sight, applying even pressure with both hands until the wobble disappears and the clay runs clean and smooth and exactly where you need it. It requires a particular quality of attention. Not force. Force makes it worse. Presence. The willingness to feel what the material is doing and adjust in real time. The wheel found its rhythm. Hyunsoo watched. He didn't speak, and I didn't feel the need to fill the silence, and that itself was a kind of information, that we could occupy the same room with a purpose running between us that wasn't about managing each other. The clay opened under my hands. A cylinder first, walls rising. Then I began to open the form, spreading from the center outward, feeling the thickness of the walls by pressure and intuition. What are you making? Hyunsoo asked. I don't know yet, I said. I don't plan what I make. I start and the material tells me. A pause. That sounds like the opposite of how I do anything, he said. I know, I said. I could tell that about you within 4 minutes of meeting you. Is that a criticism? It's an observation, I said. Planning is a form of control. Control is a form of fear sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. The wheel turned. The walls climbed. And not planning, he said. What is that a form of? Trust, I said. In the material. In the process. In the idea that what needs to emerge will, if you don't crush it trying to make it something predetermined. The room held that very carefully. I felt rather than saw Hyunsoo absorb it, the way a person does when something said in passing connects to something they've been trying to solve for years and suddenly the angle shifts. Jay used to say something similar, he said quietly. Not a comparison. A memory arriving without clearance. What did he say? I asked. A long pause. The wheel's rhythm was the only sound. He said that the problem with me was that I had already decided what everything was before I looked at it, Hyunsoo said. Including people. Including him. I kept my hands on the clay. That sounds like something that took courage to say. I said. He had more of it than I deserved, Hyunsoo said. Had. Past tense. The weight of it. You still love him, I said. Not an accusation. Not a complication. Just the shape of the truth named. Hyunsoo was quiet for long enough that the cylinder I was raising almost lost its center. Caught it. Brought it back. I don't know how to stop, he said finally. I've tried understanding how. I haven't found the mechanism. Then stop trying to find the mechanism, I said. Love isn't a mechanical problem. Everything is a mechanical problem, he said. If you understand the system well enough. No, I said. That's what fear sounds like when it puts on a suit. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. But it was not hostile. It was the silence of a man standing at the edge of something he had built specifically to avoid standing at the edge of, looking down, and discovering that the drop was not what he had calculated. The clay under my hands had found its form. Not a cylinder anymore. A bowl. Wide-mouthed, with walls that curved outward slightly at the lip, the shape that happens when you stop directing and start listening to the material. I stopped the wheel. Looked at it. There, I said. Hyunwoo leaned forward slightly to see it. His forearms on his knees, close enough now that his scent had settled into the room's air. Cedar and iron, and underneath it that warmer current that I had learned was what Hyunwoo smelled like when he stopped performing certainty. A bowl, he said. A bowl, I confirmed. You didn't plan it. No. He looked at it for a moment. Then, quietly, with the particular tone of someone saying something true for the first time in a long time, "It's good." "It is," I agreed. And then, because the room was honest and the rain was soft and I had nothing left to lose by being direct, "I'm not here to replace anyone," I said. "And I'm not here to be managed by a grief I didn't cause. I'm here because I signed a contract and I intend to fulfill its terms on my conditions, not yours." I looked at him. "But I'm also here, in this room, with clay on my hands and a bowl on the wheel that I didn't plan. And if that means something to you, something present, not something past, then I need you to know that I'm capable of receiving that. On my own terms." Hyunwoo looked at me for a long time, not assessing, not filing, not building a category, just looking. "On your own terms," he repeated. "Always," I said. Something in his face moved then. Not the flicker I had catalogued before, not the near-smile architecture, not the recalibration. Something slower and more fundamental. The particular shift of a structure that has been holding a specific shape for years and has just, in one quiet room with rain against the windows, decided it might be able to hold a different one. He reached out, not toward me, toward the bowl. One finger lightly testing the lip of the form the way you test ice, not to cross it, just to know if it holds. The clay was still wet. His fingerprint pressed into the rim. A mark. Unintentional. Present. He pulled his hand back and looked at his fingertip. I looked at the bowl. His print in the rim, permanent now in that wet clay, part of the form whether either of us had planned it or not. The material had told me what it was. A bowl that held a fingerprint that hadn't been planned. I would fire it exactly as it was. Hyunsoo appeared in the doorway. He looked at his brother. He looked at me. He looked at the bowl on the wheel with the wet clay and said nothing for a moment with the eloquence of someone who had just read an entire chapter in a single image. "Juno made tea," he said. "I'll come," I said. I covered the bowl with a damp cloth, protecting the form, preserving exactly what was there. I washed my hands at the utility sink in the corner. Dried them on the towel hanging from the hook beside my jacket. I walked toward the door. Hyunwoo stood as I passed. Not blocking, not performing, just standing at his full height, in the room that had been closed for 6 years, with the expression of a man who has just discovered that a window he bricked over many years ago might, with the right kind of effort, let in light again. "Juwansi," he said. I stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for working in here." 2 words doing the work of 100. I received them without diminishing them. "Thank you for servicing the kiln," I said, and I walked out. Behind me, I heard him exhale. Long and slow and quiet, like something that had been held in the chest for 6 years finally, carefully, beginning to move. The 3 of us sat in the kitchen with Juno's tea and the Portland rain and the particular quality of silence that exists between people who have just exchanged more honesty than they planned and are now processing the receipts. The tea was barley. Warm and slightly nutty, the kind that doesn't demand anything from you. I wrapped both hands around the cup. Hyunwoo sat across from me. He had not looked away from his cup since he sat down, turning it slightly on the table with one finger in the slow rotation of a man whose mind was running considerably faster than his exterior suggested. Hyunsoo sat at the head of the table between us, present in the way he was always present, anchoring without controlling, holding the room's temperature steady by the simple fact of his attention. "I want to fire the bowl tomorrow," I said. "If the kiln holds temperature." "It will," Hyunwoo said to his cup. "Then I'll need materials. Clay, glaze supply, firing tools." I'll have them here by morning, Hyunsoo said. Thank you. The rain moved against the window. Juno appeared from the utility corridor, took one look at the table, and quietly decided the linen shelf needed attention in the other direction. Wise man, there's something I need to say to both of you, I said. They both looked at me. I know about Jay, I said. I know the shape of what happened. I'm not going to pretend I don't, and I'm not going to tiptoe around it to protect anyone's comfort. I held each of their gazes in turn. But I am also not going to let his story write mine. I'm Seo Jaiwon. I came here with one bag and my tools and my mother's ring and a working knowledge of Oregon pack law. I am going to make things in that studio. I am going to hold my own terms in this house. And if either of you decides at some point that what's between us is something real and present rather than something familiar and comfortable, I set my cup down. Then you'll know how to find me. The kitchen held that. Hyunsoo's hands went still around his cup. Hyunwoo finally looked up from his, and the look on his face was something I had not seen there yet. Not recalibration, not assessment, not the structural examination of something he was trying to categorize. Something open, something that had, apparently, been waiting a very long time behind all those walls for someone to give it a reason to surface. And for the first time since I walked into my father's apartment and found two cold-eyed alphas waiting at the table, I felt something shift in me too. Not softness, not surrender. The specific feeling of a person who has just realized that the house they walked into as a transaction might, against all reasonable calculation, become something they choose. And that choosing it, on their own terms, with their eyes open and their tools on the desk and their mother's ring in reach, might not be the same thing as losing. Might, in fact, be exactly what winning looks like. I held that thought all the way down the corridor to my room. Set it beside my mother's ring on the desk. Let it sit there while I washed the remaining clay from my arms at the bathroom sink, watching the gray-brown water spiral away, watching my hands come back clean and bare in mine. Seo Jaiwon. Still you. I pressed a towel to my face and stood there in the steam for a moment with my eyes closed and the rain still working the window and the particular fullness of a day that had contained more real information than most months of my previous life. My body was tired in the honest way. Bones and muscles settling accounts for the hours they had been asked to carry something significant without complaint. I sat on the edge of the bed, picked up my mother's ring, turned it between my fingers in the old familiar way, thumb tracing the interior curve where the silver had worn thinnest from years of her wearing it. She used to say the worn part was the part that mattered, the part that proved it had been lived in. I put it on, left hand, middle finger, the way she wore it, and then I lay back on the dark linen and looked at the ceiling and let the day finish arriving. I did not hear the front door. What I heard was a voice, clear, carrying, American accented in the specific way of someone who grew up between two languages and landed somewhere fluid and unplaceable. Coming from the entryway. Male. Not Juno, not either twin. A third voice in a house where I had catalogued exactly 3 residents and 1 household manager. My eyes opened. I was off the bed before I had consciously decided to move, feet on the floor, body making the calculation that new information in an unfamiliar environment required presence, not distance. I did not rush. I moved with the deliberate quiet of someone who had learned that arriving at a situation before you're expected gives you the sharpest possible view of it. The corridor was dim. The entryway light was on, throwing yellow into the hall through the partially open main door. I stopped at the edge of the corridor where the shadow held and looked. Hyunsoo was in the entryway. He was very still. Across from him, holding a single bag, one bag, the specific parallel of it hitting me like cold water, stood a young man I had never seen before, slightly shorter than the twins. Dark hair longer than either of theirs, pushed back from a face that carried the particular quality of someone who had been living very carefully for a long time. Sharp eyes, the kind my grandmother had, the seeing too much kind. His scent reached me even from the corridor. Omega. And beneath it, wrapped into it the way a signature is pressed into wax. The ghost of cedarwood and iron. Pack bond. Old. Stretched to its limit by distance and time but not severed. Not severed. My hand found the wall beside me. Not for support. For something solid. Oh no. Jae-hyuna, Hyunsoo said. His voice had done something I had not heard from it in all of the hours I had spent learning its textures. It had broken. Not loudly. Just the single hairline fracture of a structure that has been holding against pressure for 6 years and has just been asked to hold against something it was not engineered for. The young man, Jae-hyun, the name from the photograph, the name from the back of the frame, the name that had been living in the walls of this house for 6 years, looked at Hyunsoo with an expression I recognized with the precision of someone who has worn it themselves. The expression of a person who rehearsed this moment 10,000 times and has now arrived at it and discovered that rehearsal accounts for nothing. Hyunsoo, he said. One word. The informal address. The drop of honorific. 6 years of distance collapsed into a single syllable of familiarity that neither of them had apparently been able to discard. I did not move. I was aware, with great clarity, that I was standing in a shadow watching a moment that was not mine, that had been building for 6 years before I arrived in this house, that contained a magnitude of history and pain and unresolved love that my 48 hours of residency had no standing to interrupt. I was also aware that I could not make myself leave. Because Hyunsoo's face. Because the way he was looking at Jay like a man who has been treading water for 6 years and has just seen the shore and cannot determine yet if it is real or if his mind has finally started generating what it needs to survive. I should have called, Jay said. Yes, Hyunsoo said. I couldn't. Jay's hand tightened on his bag strap. I tried. 7 times I dialed and hung up. I'm sorry. Don't, Hyunsoo said, the word coming out rough at the edges. Don't apologize before I, just, he exhaled. Just come inside. Come in from the cold. Jay stepped over the threshold, and Hyunsoo reached for him. Not grabbing. The specific restrained reach of a person who is not sure they have permission but cannot physically complete the action of not reaching. His hand found Jay's shoulder and stayed there, and Jay went very still under it, and the two of them stood in the entryway light with 6 years between them, wearing the exact weight you would expect 6 years to wear. I turned around, walked back down the corridor to my room, closed the door, and stood in the dark with my back against it and my mother's ring on my finger, and the full architectural reality of the situation settling into me like water finding its level. Jay was back. The pack bond that had never been severed, stretched thin by 6 years of distance and silence, had apparently pulled tight enough that one of them had finally moved toward it. And the house that I had walked into 48 hours ago, the house I had started with full deliberate intention to make my own, belonged to him in a way that no contract clause or monthly stipend or East Wing designation could touch. Not legally, not structurally, emotionally. This was Jay's house, Jay's studio, Jay's bowl on the wheel with Hyunsoo's fingerprint in the rim. My hands were shaking. I looked at them in the dark of my room with the distant sound of voices in the entryway carrying through the walls, and I noted the shaking the way I noted everything. As data, as information, as something to understand rather than perform. You are afraid, I told myself. That is allowed. Name it and then decide what to do with it. I was afraid of being erased. Not physically, not contractually, but in the way that matters more than either of those, the way where you have just begun to believe that a space has room for you and then the ground shifts and you understand that the space was never unclaimed, it was just waiting, and what you read as possibility was actually the shape of someone else's absence. I pressed my back harder against the door. No, Seo Jaiwan. You have been erased by smaller things than this and you are still here. You are still you. You do not disappear because someone else arrives. You are not negative space. You are not defined by what you are not. You have clay on the wheel and your mother's ring on your hand and you came here with your tools. Hold that. I pushed off the door, crossed to the desk, sat down, and waited for the sound of Hyunsoo's footsteps coming back into the house. Because that was the information I needed most and did not yet have. I heard the front door open again at 11 minutes past the sound of Jay's arrival. Footsteps in the entryway. The particular even gate I had identified on the second morning. Then silence. Then Hyunsoo's voice, lower now, carrying the specific compression of a conversation that has reached a wall it cannot go around. The words were indistinct. The shape was not. Hyunwoo had come home and found Jay in his entryway. I closed my eyes and listened to the shape of the next 4 minutes the way I had listened through the wall on the first night. Counting, cataloging, reading the architecture of what I couldn't directly hear. 3 voices this time. The 4-minute argument from the first night had been 2. Controlled. Practiced. The argument of people who had been having the same fight long enough to know its geography. This was different. This had edges. This had the specific ragged quality of people encountering something they did not have a rehearsed response for, colliding with it in real time without the protection of preparation. It lasted 9 minutes. Then one voice dropped out. Footsteps on the stairs. Fast. The other even-patterned gait, Hyunsoo, moving with the specific velocity of a man removing himself from a situation before his control of it fails entirely. Then quiet. Then a door above me closing. Not with force. With the terrible precision of someone who is furious and has decided that the most devastating thing he can do is be completely controlled about it. I sat at my desk in the dark. My mother's ring caught the faint light from the window, and then Hyunsoo knocked on my door. I opened it. He stood in the corridor looking like a man who had just been asked to choose between his left hand and his right and had not yet been shown the instrument that would do the cutting. His scent was disrupted. That warmer undercurrent gone entirely, the cedar and iron stripped back to something raw and exposed, the way a material looks when you've taken it down to its base layer. "You heard," he said. "I heard enough," I said. He looked at me with the open-door expression that had cost him so much in Act 5 and had apparently not gotten any easier to maintain since. "Come to the sitting room," he said. "Please." The please landed differently from Hyunsoo than it would from anyone else. Not because he was incapable of it, but because he used it rarely enough that when it arrived it carried full weight. I came. Jay was in the sitting room, sitting in the chair closest to the fire, the chair Hyunsoo had sat in when he told me about the pack bond, when he told me the whole shape of what this house had been and lost. Jay sat in it with his bag beside him and his hands wrapped around a cup of Juno's tea, like someone who needed something to hold. He looked up when I walked in. His eyes were exactly what the photograph had shown. Sharp, dark, seeing too much. They moved across my face with the particular speed of someone who has grown up reading rooms for survival and has not lost the reflex. I watched him do the same thing I had done to everyone in this house from the first moment. Catalog. Assess. Decide. "You're the transfer," he said. "Seo Jaiwin," I said. "Yes." He looked at Hyunsoo. Something passed between them that I was not meant to read but read anyway. "I didn't know," Jay said. To Hyunsoo. Then back to me, direct and without deflection. "I didn't know there was someone here. I would have," he stopped, reconsidered, restarted with more honesty. "I don't know what I would have done. But I would have known." "It's fine," I said. "It's not," he said. "You're living in my—" He caught himself. Looked at the fire. "You're living in the East Wing." "I am," I said. "And the workroom," he said quietly. "Yes." The fire made its small sounds. Hyunsoo stood between us like a man trying to physically anchor 2 gravitational forces that were pulling in directions he hadn't calculated for. Jay looked at his tea. "I didn't come back for the house," he said, to no one specifically. "I came back because the bond." He pressed his lips together. "I came back because 6 years was long enough to prove a point and I wasn't sure what I was proving anymore." "What point?" I asked. He looked up at me. Surprised, I think, that I asked directly. That I didn't perform deference or sympathy or careful emotional management. That I could exist without it, he said. "Could you?" I asked. The fire between us. The rain outside. Hyunsoo completely still. Jay held my gaze for a long moment. "No," he said. "Not the way I wanted to." I sat down. Not in defeat. In decision. Because this conversation required me to be present in it rather than adjacent to it, and adjacent was a form of erasure I had just spent 10 minutes in the dark refusing. "I need to ask you something directly," I said, "and I need you to answer it the same way." Jay set his cup down. "Okay. Did you come back for Hyunsoo?" I said. "Or for both of them?" The sitting room went absolutely still. Hyunsoo stopped breathing. Jay looked at me with those seeing too much eyes and I watched something move through him that was older and more complicated than anything a direct answer could contain. "Both," he said. Finally. Quietly. "I came back for both. Even the one who—" He stopped. Even the one who never marked you, I said. The word landed like a stone into water. Jay flinched. Not dramatically, the small interior flinch of someone who has trained the exterior response out but hasn't quite reached the nerve underneath. Yes, he said. I looked at Hyunsoo. Hyunsoo looked back at me with an expression I had no word for. Not apology. Not appeal. Something more layered than either. The expression of a man watching two people he cares about in completely different registers have a conversation he should have had years ago with one of them and has been trying in 48 hours to have differently with the other. There's something you both need to know, Hyunsoo said. His voice had the quality of a door being opened from the inside. Slowly. With full knowledge of what was on the other side. Hyunwoo didn't bring Jaiwon here as a replacement, he said. I told you that, Jawansi. But I didn't tell you the full reason. Hyunwoo agreed. I went very still. Jay's eyes had moved to Hyunsoo with the precision of a compass finding north. He agreed, Hyunsoo said carefully. Because 2 months ago, he found out where Jay was. He had someone track the bond signature. He found the address. And he did not reach out. A pause that had weight in every gram of it. But he started watching the bond line. The way you watch something you're terrified to touch but more terrified to look away from. The fire. The rain. My own heartbeat, which had decided this was an appropriate moment to be extremely audible. He brought Jaiwon here, Hyunsoo said. Because he was trying to prove to himself that he could let Jay go. That he could build something new. That the bond could be. He stopped. His jaw worked. He called it practice. He told me it was practice. Practice. I was practice. The word arrived in my chest like something thrown from a significant height. Not cruelty. I understood it was not cruelty. I understood with complete clarity what it was. A man in enormous pain making an enormous mistake, trying to use motion as a substitute for healing, trying to build a present to escape a past that had never actually released him. I understood it. And it still cut. Jawansi, Hyunsoo said. His voice had dropped to the register it took when he was being most careful. I need you to know that whatever he called it in his own head, what happened in this house in 48 hours was not practice. What I saw at that kitchen table this morning was not practice. What happened in the workroom tonight was... Stop, I said. He stopped. I looked at my mother's ring on my hand. The worn part on the interior curve. The part that had been lived in. I had walked into this house with my tools and my contract knowledge and my grandmother's eyes, and I had cleaned a dead Omega studio and told an alpha he was leverage and made a bowl I didn't plan and meant every word I said about my own terms. And it had been, at least in part, a man's attempt to practice letting go of someone else. Is he upstairs? I asked. Yes, Hyunsoo said. I stood up. Both of them looked at me. Then I'm going to go talk to him, I said. Because I have things to say that don't get better from waiting. Jaiwon, Hyunsoo started. I'm not going to damage him, I said. I'm going to be honest with him. Those are different things. I looked at Jay. I'll be back. Don't go anywhere. Jay blinked. And then, quietly, with the specific warmth of someone who recognizes something familiar in a stranger's face. Okay, he said. I walked out of the sitting room, up the stairs, to the door at the end of the upper hall where the light underneath it said the person inside had not slept. I knocked. 3 times. Deliberate and clear. The silence on the other side lasted exactly long enough for a man to decide that pretending not to be home was beneath him. Then, come in. Hyunwoo was sitting at the window of what I understood immediately was his room. Not a bedroom performing personality, but a room that revealed it despite itself. Spare. Dark wood, 1 lamp, books arranged with military precision on a single shelf, and on the desk, face down, a photograph I did not need to turn over to identify. He was still in his black sweater. He looked at me when I came in with the expression of a man who had already constructed 17 responses to this conversation and suspected none of them were going to be adequate. Jawansi, he said. Practice, I said. The word hit him visibly. His jaw tightened. His hands, resting on his knees, went still in a way that was different from his usual control. This was not managed stillness. This was impact. Hyunsoo told you, he said. Yes. He looked at the window. The dark glass. his own faint reflection in it. I owe you an. Don't apologize, I said. Not yet. Listen first. He looked back at me. I know what you were doing, I said. I understand the mechanics of it. You found Jay. You couldn't reach toward him and you couldn't fully release him, and you built a middle option that let you feel like you were moving without actually making a choice. I sat down in the chair across from his without being invited because this conversation required equal footing. I understand that. I am not going to pretend it didn't happen. And I am not going to tell you it didn't affect me, because it did. His face was doing the thing I had seen in the workroom, the open thing, the wall with the door in it. But wider now. More exposed. What I am going to tell you, I said, is that whatever you called it in your head, I walked into this house as Seo Jaiwan and I stayed Seo Jaiwan. Every choice I made here was mine. The studio, the bowl, that conversation at breakfast. Mine. You don't get to retroactively make those into something smaller by telling me they were practice. I'm not, he started. I'm not finished, I said. He closed his mouth. Jay is downstairs, I said. He came back. The bond pulled him back and he came, and that is between you and him and Hyunsoo, and it has nothing to do with me. What does have to do with me is this. I leaned forward slightly. If you brought me here to prove something to yourself about letting go, you failed. Because you serviced that kiln and you wrote that East Wing clause with your brother and you came back to the workroom tonight and you put your fingerprint in my bowl. And none of that is what a man does who is practicing letting go. The room held its breath. Hyunwoo looked at me with something on his face that had no managed quality left in it whatsoever. Raw. Unguarded in the specific way of someone whose last wall has just been named directly and precisely, and they have no architecture left to replace it with. What is it then? He said. His voice was very quiet. I don't know yet, I said. That's the honest answer. But I know it's real. And I know that real things deserve real names. Not practice. Not replacement. Not a category you file something in so you don't have to feel it. He looked at his hands. For a long moment he said nothing. And then, without looking up, in the quietest voice I had heard from him, I didn't know he was coming back. I know, I said. I didn't plan. Nobody plans the thing that matters most, I said. You told me yourself. You plan everything. And somehow this, I gestured between us, between the room and the house and everything the last 48 hours had contained, happened anyway. He finally looked up. And the look on his face broke something in me that I had not known was breakable. Not my strength. Not my terms. Not my name or my tools or my mother's ring. Something smaller and more essential. The specific wall I had built around the part of me that believed a transaction could become something chosen. That believed I had read this house right. That believed the bowl with the unplanned fingerprint meant something to both of us and not just to me. That wall cracked. And I let it crack because I was Seo Jaiwan and I did not lie to myself about what I felt in the same way I did not lie to anyone else. Go downstairs, I said. Talk to Jay. Say the things you never said. Say them out loud, in actual words, so there is no room for silence to be misread this time. I stood. And then figure out what's true. I walked to the door. Juwansi. I stopped. I'm sorry, he said. Not as an apology that closes something. As one that knows it has to stay open. I stood with my hand on the doorframe. My mother's ring on my finger. The crack in my wall doing what cracks do when they're honest. Letting the air in. I know the difference, I said. That's why I'll accept it. I walked out. The hallway was empty and dark and the rain outside had finally, completely stopped. And the silence it left behind was not peaceful. It was the silence of everything rearranging itself. Of a house full of people who had just told too much truth to pretend tomorrow would look like today. And I walked back down those stairs with my grandmother's eyes wide open, seeing everything, forgiving nothing yet, and understanding with complete and devastating clarity that the hardest part was not what had just broken. It was what I was going to do with the pieces. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Not because my legs failed me, because my mind demanded a full stop before the next movement, the way you stop before a threshold you cannot uncross once you've crossed it. The sitting room door was slightly open. Firelight moving in the gap. Two voices inside, low and careful, doing the work that 6 years of silence had left unfinished. I did not go in. I turned and walked to the workroom, because that was where I knew how to think. Not at a desk, not in a chair, not lying in the dark cataloging the ceiling. At a wheel, with my hands in material that required honesty, that punished distraction, that had no patience for anything except what was actually true. I unlocked the door, went in, turned on the single overhead light that cast the room in the particular warmth of a working studio at night, soft and amber and without apology. I sat at the wheel, did not touch the covered bowl with Hyunsoo's fingerprint in the rim. I broke a new piece of clay from the second bag, smaller this time, and began wedging it with the slow, deliberate pressure of someone who needs the motion more than the product. Think, I told myself. All of it. Don't manage it. Think it. Here was what was true. I had walked into this house as a transaction and I had refused, at every point, to become one. That was still true. Nobody had taken that from me. Not Hyunsoo's practice. Not Jay's return. Not the photograph on the shelf or the argument I had listened to through the wall, or the 4 minutes I had stood in a corridor, watching two people reach for each other across 6 years of damage. My tools were on the desk in my room. My mother's ring was on my hand. The bowl on the wheel beside me was mine, made by my hands, shaped by my instinct, fired in a kiln that someone had maintained on hope alone. Those were facts. Hold those. Here was what was also true. I had felt something in this house that I had not planned for and had not, despite my considerable talent for self-protection, been able to keep at a distance. Something about Hyunsoo's careful door claws and the way he noticed which side dish I hadn't taken enough of. Something about Hyunsoo's fingerprint pressing into wet clay without meaning to, leaving a mark he couldn't take back and hadn't tried to. Something about a house full of people who were all, in their different ways, trying to figure out how to stay present in something that had already hurt them once and showed significant probability of hurting them again. I recognized that project. I had been running it my entire life. The clay under my hands was coming around, losing resistance. The wedging motion was finding its rhythm, that particular meditative repetition that empties the noise from the top layer of the mind and lets the actual thinking happen underneath. So think, what did I want? Not what was contractual, not what was strategic, not what was defensible or logical or the answer a person with my history and my careful architecture of self-preservation should want. What did Seo Jaiwon, 24 years old, clay in his knuckles and his mother's ring on his left hand, actually want from this house and these people and the strange cracked open situation he had walked into with one bag and enough legal knowledge to make an alpha reconsider? I stopped wedging. I looked at my hands on the clay, the worn silver on my finger. The answer was not comfortable. It arrived without drama, without the shape of a revelation, the way honest things usually do. Not as lightning but as the slow understanding that the light has been on for a while and you simply stopped ignoring it. I wanted to stay. Not because of the contract. Not because Portland was better than Seattle or the East Wing was more space than I had ever had or the workroom was the closest thing to a real studio I had ever worked in. Because of the kitchen table at 7 in the morning and barley tea at night and a man who put 3 stones in a bowl with intention and a man who asked if I was hungry with no expectation attached and the specific quality of being seen in this house. Really seen, past the designation, past the transaction. In a way I had been telling myself I didn't need because needing things you might not get is the most efficient form of pain available. I wanted to stay. And Jay was in the sitting room. Those two facts sat beside each other in the honest dark of my own mind without resolution. I heard the sitting room door open. Footsteps in the corridor. One set. The uneven pattern, right foot quieter than left. Hyunsoo. He stopped outside the workroom. A pause. Then the door opened and he came in with the particular expression of a man who has just come from something enormous and is still carrying the weight of it in his body. He looked at me at the wheel. The new clay. My hands. He didn't say anything immediately. He moved to the wedging table and sat. The same position Hyunwoo had occupied earlier, forearms on knees, present without crowding. The amber light sat between us. How is he? I asked. Hyunsoo knew I meant Jay. Exhausted, he said. Scared. Here. A beat. Fully here, I think. Not visiting. Here. And you? I asked. He looked at his own hands for a moment. I don't have a clean answer for that. I'm not asking for clean, I said. I'm asking for true. He exhaled slowly. I'm relieved he's alive and whole and in that room. I'm devastated by what the last 6 years cost him. I'm furious at Hyunwoo in a way I've been furious at him for 6 years and have somehow not resolved. He paused. And I'm sitting in this workroom at whatever hour this is because you are the person I needed to talk to and I don't fully understand why. The wheel was still. My hands rested on the unformed clay. Because I'm outside it, I said. I don't have 6 years of history with any of you. I see it clean. What do you see? He asked. I looked at the bowl under its damp cloth. The new clay under my hands. I see 3 people who love each other in ways that got tangled up in silence and pride and fear until the love became indistinguishable from the damage it caused. I said, I see a pack bond that never broke because genuine things don't break cleanly. They just stretch until someone moves. I looked at him, and I see you, sitting in the middle of it for 6 years, holding both ends of something that was tearing in opposite directions. Holding it with both hands because the alternative was watching it snap completely. Hyunsoo was very still. That's accurate, he said quietly. It's also not sustainable, I said. It never was. No, he said. It wasn't. The rain had stopped outside, but the world still sounded wet. Drops falling from the Douglas firs onto the stone path in irregular percussion. The aftermath of water finding its level. What happens now? I asked. To the pack. To the bond. Hyunsoo looked at the window. Jay came back to complete the bond, he said carefully. To give Hyunwoo the choice he never made. One more time. Final. He paused. Not an ultimatum. More like a door left open that has been drafty for 6 years, and someone has finally decided it needs to be either walked through or closed. The door. The language of this house. Everything expressed in terms of thresholds and entries and the choice of whether to cross them. And Hyunwoo, I said. He went downstairs 10 minutes after you left his room, Hyunsoo said. He knocked on the sitting room door. A pause heavy enough to press against the skin. He's in there now, with Jay. Something moved through me. Not jealousy. I examined it carefully to be certain, and it was not jealousy. It was more complex than that. The particular feeling of watching a story reach the chapter it was always building toward and understanding that you arrived in the middle of it, not at the beginning, and the middle is not the same as the center. What does that mean for the pack? I asked. If the bond completes. It means the pack reopens, Hyunsoo said. It means the 3 of us rebuild what we should have built 6 years ago. He stopped. Then, with the careful precision of someone delivering the most important sentence they have constructed in a very long time. And it means your contract becomes something different from what it was when you signed it. I looked at him. Different how? I said. The transfer clause becomes void, he said. You can't be held to an Omega transfer contract inside an active completed pack bond without your explicit consent to revised terms. He held my gaze. You would be free to leave, fully, with the debt cleared regardless. That clause was always in the contract, Juwonsi. Buried in the secondary conditions. I put it there. Of course he did. Of course Kwon Hyunsoo, who wrote the East Wing clause and noticed the side dish and brought tea to the workroom, had also buried an exit door in the contract for a person he hadn't met yet. You planned for this, I said. I planned for the possibility that something might change and you should not be trapped by a document signed before the change occurred. He said. I planned for exits. It's what I do when I care about something. His brother planned for connection by servicing kills in empty rooms. This one planned for freedom by hiding exit clauses in contracts. 2 versions of the same impossible love. I don't want to leave, I said. The words arrived without strategy. Without the protective wrapping I usually put around true things. Just direct, clean, and out in the amber light of the workroom before I could reconsider. Hyunsoo's breath shifted. Juwonsi, he said. I know what I'm saying, I said. I know what it means and I know what it complicates and I know that Jay is in the next room and Hyunwoo is in there with him and I am sitting here with new clay and my mother's ring telling you that I do not want the exit clause. I pressed my palms flat against the clay, felt its give, its resistance, its honest temperature. I want revised terms. Mine. Written by me. Not buried in secondary conditions, but stated in the primary language of whatever this becomes. The room held that. Hyunsoo looked at me for a long time with the open-door expression that had cost him so much every time it appeared, and had apparently not gotten easier to sustain but had also not closed. Then we write them, he said. All of us. Together. When the sun comes up and everyone in this house has slept and whatever needs to happen in that sitting room has happened. Together. I said. Yes. I looked at the clay under my hands. Hyunsoo, I said. The informal address. No honorific. The first time I had used it. He went very still. Thank you, I said. For the East Wing clause. For the materials order. For the tea you sent to the workroom that I didn't ask for and the side dish you noticed and the exit clause you hid in case I needed it. I met his eyes. For all the ways you took care of something before it knew it needed taking care of. His jaw moved. Once. Controlled. You're the first person, he said quietly, who has ever listed those things back to me. Then the people in your life haven't been paying attention, I said. And something in Hyunsoo, who had held both ends of a breaking thing for 6 years with both hands and no acknowledgement, came apart very quietly in the amber light of a workroom studio at an indeterminate hour of a night that had already contained more truth than most years. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way a structure releases when the pressure that has been holding it rigid is finally, carefully removed. His head dropped slightly. Not defeat. Relief. The specific physical relief of a body that has been braced against something for so long it forgot the bracing was optional. I did not touch him. I held the space, present and solid and not going anywhere. Sometimes that is the most significant thing one person can offer another. Simply staying. We sat in the workroom for another hour, not talking much. The amber light and the wet sound of the garden and the clay warming under my intermittent hands. Hyunsoo on the stool with his forearms on his knees and his head no longer braced against anything. At some point Juno appeared in the doorway, looked at both of us, and disappeared again. 10 minutes later there was a tray on the floor outside the door with 2 cups of barley tea and a covered dish of leftover rice and banchan that he had clearly prepared with the specific attentiveness of a man who understood that people in emotional crisis forget to eat. I brought it in. We ate rice and banchan at an unreasonable hour in a studio that still smelled of old clay and new beginning, sitting across from each other with the easy quiet of people who have already said the hard things and have nothing left to perform. The sitting room down the corridor stayed closed. I did not track the sounds from it anymore. That was not my accounting to keep. What happened in that room between those 3 people and that bond was theirs, and I had enough respect for the weight of it to leave it its privacy. My own accounting was here. This room, this wheel, this bowl under its cloth with a fingerprint in the rim. These choices. When the tea was gone and the banchan dish was empty, Hyunsoo looked at me across the tray. You should sleep, he said. So should you, I said. I will, he said. In a moment. I stood, stretched, felt the specific exhaustion of a body that had been carrying emotional weight in addition to its physical one, and was now quietly requesting acknowledgement. At the door I stopped. Hyunsoo, I said again, because the informal address was mine now and I intended to keep using it. He looked up. Whatever gets written tomorrow, I said. Make sure your name is in the primary language too, not just as the one who holds everything together. I held his gaze. As someone who gets to want something for himself. The amber light, his face, the particular expression of a person hearing something so specifically aimed at the thing they have been quietly starving for that their whole body registers it before their mind catches up. Good night, Jawansi, he said softly. Jaiwin, I said. Just Jaiwin. And the almost smile that had been threatening to become a real one since the car from Seattle finally, completely, did. I walked out, down the corridor, into the East Wing, through my door. I stood in the center of my room in the dark, my tools on the desk, my mother's ring on my hand, the photograph of her hidden in the shelf where it caught the morning light. Outside, the Douglas firs were beginning to separate themselves from the dark, the sky behind them making its slow transition from black to the particular deep blue that comes just before dawn remembers it has a job. Not today, I thought. Today already happened. What comes next is tomorrow. I sat on the edge of the bed. I did not lie down, because somewhere down the corridor, in the sitting room with the low fire and the 3 stones in the bowl and 6 years of silence finally being spoken into words, something was either ending or becoming. And I needed to be awake for whichever it was. Not to watch it, not to manage it or assess it or file it in the appropriate category. Just to be present in the same house while it happened. Because presence, I had learned in 48 hours in this building, was not a passive thing. It was the most active choice available. And Seo Jaiwon did not make passive choices. Not once. Not ever. The sitting room door opened at 5:47 in the morning. I heard it from my room the way I had heard everything in this house, through walls and distance and the particular quality of silence that this building used as a communication system. 3 sets of footsteps in the corridor, moving together. The cadence of people who have reached the end of something enormous and are now simply navigating toward the next necessary thing, which was sleep, which was breath, which was the ordinary continuation of being alive after a night that had cost everything available. They passed the east wing door. All 3 of them. The footsteps climbed the stairs. And then the house went quiet in a way it had not been quiet since I arrived. Not the held breath quiet of tension or the managed quiet of people performing composure, but the deep, settled quiet of a place that has finally, after a very long time, exhaled. I sat on the edge of my bed. I pressed my thumb to the inside of my mother's ring, the worn part, the lived-in part, and I made a decision that had, honestly, been assembling itself since the moment I sat at a Seattle kitchen table and looked at 2 identical strangers and chose not to look away. I was going to write my own terms, tomorrow, in the primary language, and they were going to be real and specific and completely mine. And whatever this house became after the sun came up and the revised terms were written and the bowl in the workroom was fired in a kiln that had been maintained on nothing but stubborn, inarticulate hope, whatever it became, I was going to be in it as Seo Jaiwon. Fully. Without apology. Without waiting for permission to matter. The way I had always lived. The only way I knew. I sat with that until the blue outside my window became gray and the gray became the particular pale gold of a Pacific Northwest morning that had decided, after a night of rain, to try something different. Then I stood up, washed my face, changed my shirt, put my feet into the floor of this house with the specific intentionality of someone who has decided that the ground beneath them is worth claiming. I did not wait for anyone to come to me. I went to the kitchen, started the rice cooker the way I had watched Juno do it, the ratio, the rinse, the particular setting for the short-grain Korean variety that sat in the left canister. I found the doenjang in the refrigerator and started the jjigae from the base up, the way my mother's friend had taught me in the studio kitchen on Saturday mornings when making food was as much a part of the education as making objects. I was not performing domesticity. I was doing what I did when I needed to think clearly, working with my hands, building something real from available materials, producing something that could be set in front of people and consumed and would cost them nothing except the willingness to sit down. The kitchen filled with the smell of it. Fermented and warm and deeply, specifically Korean in a way that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with the particular form of care that expresses itself through feeding people before they know they're hungry. Juno appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:15, took one look at the stove, and his expression did something that was not quite surprise and not quite emotion but landed somewhere in the territory between them. "Jwansi," he said. "Sit down, Junhasi." I said, "You've been taking care of this house for 11 years. Someone should take care of you for 20 minutes. He sat down. And the kitchen held the sounds of a meal being made and the morning light coming in at its new angle, and the particular quiet of a house where everyone who needed to sleep was sleeping and everything that needed to be said had been said, and what remained was simply the next honest moment following the one before it. I set a bowl in front of Juno, sat across from him with my own. We ate in the comfortable silence of people who have been through something together without being in it together, which is its own form of solidarity. "They're all upstairs," Juno said eventually. A statement, not a question. "Yes." I said. He nodded. The pack bond, he said carefully. If it completes. I know, I said. You're not afraid, he said. The same observation Hyunsoo had made in the car from Seattle a lifetime ago, which was actually 60 hours ago. I know what I want, I said. Fear doesn't change that. It just makes it louder. Juno looked at me across the table with the eyes of a man who had watched this house from the inside for 11 years and had a considerable investment in what it became. He talked about you, he said. Last night. Hyunsoo. Before Jay arrived. He came to the kitchen for tea and he said, Juno stopped, considered his own threshold, crossed it. He said he hadn't expected you. I looked at my bowl. He said it like it was the best thing that had happened in this house in a very long time. The doenjang jjigae steamed between us. My mother's ring caught the morning light. I did not trust my voice for a moment, so I did not use it. The house began waking at 8. Not with noise. With the particular shift in atmospheric pressure that happens when sleeping people move toward consciousness, the small sounds of inhabited space that change quality when the inhabitants start moving through it again. Footsteps upstairs. Water running through pipes. A door. I had moved to the workroom by then. The bowl needed to be checked before firing, the clay assessed for dryness, the form examined for cracks that would only reveal themselves in the kiln if I missed them now. I removed the damp cloth. The bowl sat on the wheel exactly as I had left it. Wide-mouthed, walls curved outward at the lip, and there, in the rim, Hyunwoo's fingerprint. Pressed into the clay when it was wet, now dried into the form permanently, as much a part of the object as anything my own hands had made. I examined it for cracks. There were none. I began preparing the kiln. The process required full attention, loading the bowl onto the kiln shelf, setting the temperature curve, checking the seal on the door, programming the firing schedule. I had done this enough times that my hands moved through it with the particular confidence of deeply practiced competence, the kind that lives in muscle memory rather than active thought. I was checking the temperature program when I heard the workroom door. I did not turn immediately. I had learned in this house that turning immediately gave too much away. The scent reached me before I identified the footstep. Cedar and iron. But different from yesterday. From the car. From every reading I had taken since Seattle. The compression was gone. The managed quality. The iron still present, but the cedar fuller now, warmer, opened up in a way that only happens when something a person has been holding for a very long time has finally been set down. I turned. Hyunwoo stood in the doorway. He had slept. His hair showed it, slightly disordered in a way he would correct the moment he was aware of it, but not yet. His face had a quality I had not seen on it before. Not the operational blankness. Not the recalibration stare. Something that lived below both of those. The expression of a man who has walked through a fire he had been circling for 6 years and has come out the other side not unburned but upright. He looked at the kiln, the bowl on the shelf inside it. He looked at me. You're firing it, he said. Yes, I said. Did you sleep? Some, he said. He came into the room. Not to the window this time. To the wedging table. His stool. The position he had found last night when he decided to stay. He sat. I owe you a real conversation, he said. You owe me revised terms. I said. The conversation can be part of them. Something moved across his face. Not quite the smile I had watched his brother almost produce a dozen times. Something more fundamental than that. The specific expression of a person who has spent years moving through a world where nobody spoke to them the way they actually needed to be spoken to and has just, repeatedly, encountered someone who does it without apparent effort. Hyunsoo told me what you said last night, he said. About the practice. I meant it. I said. I know. He looked at his hands. I need you to know something about it. Not as a defense. As the truth. I waited. When I found Jay's location 2 months ago, he said. I sat with his address for 3 days. Just sat with it. Knowing where he was and understanding that knowing wasn't the same as having a right to act on it. He paused. And I realized that the reason I had never marked him wasn't what he thought it was. I went very still. What was it? I asked. Terror, he said simply. Not of him, of what marking meant, of being the kind of person who was allowed to be chosen, of having something real and being the one who... His jaw worked. My entire life I have managed everything, controlled everything, built every system tight enough that nothing could fail in a way I hadn't anticipated. He looked up, and Jay was the one thing I could not put a system around. He was real in a way that made all my architecture feel like scaffolding. And instead of understanding that as the point, I made it into a threat. The kiln beside me began its warm-up cycle. A low, almost inaudible hum, the beginning of heat. And last night, I said. Last night I sat across from him in the sitting room, he said. And I said everything I had not said in 3 years, out loud, in words, every wall down. He exhaled, and he listened, and then he said something I will not repeat because it belongs to him. And then I understood that what I had cost him was real, and what I had cost myself was real, and neither of those facts cancels the other. And the bond? I asked. A pause. Complete, he said quietly. As of 4 this morning. The kiln hummed, the bowl on its shelf, his fingerprint in the rim. Complete. The word settled into the room with the gravity of something that had been building for 6 years and had finally found its form. Then the pack reopens, I said. Yes. And my contract changes. Yes. He held my gaze. But Juwansi, I need you to understand something before we write the new terms. Tell me, I said. I brought you here for the wrong reason, he said. I have told you that and I meant it. But what happened in this house in the last 2 days? He stopped. Restarted with the careful precision of a man who has learned, in approximately 14 hours, that precision and truth are not always the same tool. What I felt in this room last night, what I feel right now, sitting here while you fire a bowl that contains something of mine that I did not plan to leave there. He looked at the kiln, at the bowl inside it. That is not practice. That is not history. That is something I do not have a category for, and I am choosing, this time, not to build one. I stood across from him with the kiln's warmth beginning to move in the air between us. My grandmother's eyes, sharp and dark and seeing too much. Seeing this. Hyunsoo, I said. The informal address. No honorific. The same gift I had given his brother the night before. His breath shifted. Whatever we write into the new terms, I said. I want one thing stated in the primary language. Not buried. Not conditional. Name it, he said. That I am Seo Jaiwan, I said. Not a transfer. Not a practice. Not a replacement or a stand-in or a comfort or a category. Seo Jaiwan, who came here with one bag and his tools and his mother's ring, and the full intention of being exactly himself in whatever space he occupied. I held his gaze without movement, and that whoever chooses to be in this pack with me does so knowing that, fully, without reservation. Hyunsoo looked at me for a long time, the kiln warming behind me, the bowl inside it with his print in the rim, moving toward the heat that would make it permanent, make it real, make it the kind of thing that could not be taken back or reclassified or filed under something manageable. I know who you are, he said. Then say it, I said, out loud. He stood, and Hyunsoo, who had not crossed a room toward something he wanted without a system in place for years, crossed this one without one. He stopped in front of me, close enough that the cedarwood and iron and that warm open undercurrent that was his real scent filled every breath I took. Seo Jaiwan, he said, my name in his mouth, deliberate and unguarded and nothing like a category. Who came here with one bag and his tools and his mother's ring. His eyes on mine. I see you. 3 words. I see you. Not I want you. Not I need you. Not the language of transaction or desire or any of the other things that can be mistaken for recognition. I see you. The thing I had been telling myself I did not need because needing it and not receiving it was the most efficient form of pain available. My hands were steady. My pulse was not. Good, I said, and my voice came out even and strong and completely mine. Then we write the terms. We wrote them at the kitchen table. All of us. Hyunsoo with his careful legal vocabulary. Hyunsoo with his system's precision. Jay across from me, the photograph made real, those sharp eyes watching mine with the specific understanding of someone who has been exactly where I am standing and knows which parts of the ground are solid. Juno made coffee and quietly did not leave the room. The terms were specific. Mine. Written in the primary language exactly as I had demanded. Seo Jaiwon. Not a transfer. Full pack member by voluntary consent. East Wing permanent. Workroom exclusive. Terms subject to revision by mutual agreement. Exit clause available at any point for any reason. No debt reinstatement. Hyunsoo slid the document across to me. I read every word. Found them accurate. Picked up the pen. And stopped. Because Jay's hand had moved across the table and covered mine. Not taking the pen. Just covering my hand. Warm and steady and carrying the specific weight of someone who understands what it costs to sign a document in a room full of people you are still deciding whether to trust. It's real, he said quietly. This one is real. I looked at him. Those eyes. The photograph made present. The sculptor who had worked in my workroom before I knew it existed. Who had left a ghost in its walls that I had moved through for 2 days without knowing whose it was. I know, I said. I'm glad you're here, he said. Simply. Without complication. And something in me that had been calculating since Seattle. Since the contract table. Since the corridor with my father's relieved smile and 2 cold-eyed strangers. Finally, carefully, stopped. I signed. Set the pen down. Looked around the table at the 4 people in this kitchen. The household manager who had driven someone he loved to a bus station 6 years ago and had been tending to the aftermath ever since. The twin who held everything together with both hands and had just, last night, been given permission to want something for himself. The man who had come back across 6 years of silence and 1 unsevered bond to give an unspoken love a final chance at language. And the one across from me, who had serviced a kiln and pressed his fingerprint into wet clay and said I see you in a room full of heat and had not looked away. This was the pack. Not what it was. What it was becoming. And I was in it as Seo Jaiwon. Fully. Without apology. The morning light through the kitchen window was the best light the room had shown me yet. Clear and direct and honest. The kind that does not soften anything but makes everything visible. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. Breathed. Finally. The bowl came out of the kiln 3 hours later. I lifted it from the shelf with both hands and held it in the workroom light and turned it slowly, checking the surface, reading the fire's work the way you read any transformation. For what held, what changed, what became something it wasn't before it went in. The walls had taken the glaze cleanly. The form had held its shape. The wide mouth, the slightly outward curve of the lip. Exactly as made, exactly as intended. And the fingerprint in the rim. Fired now. Permanent. Fused into the clay at temperature high enough to make the 2 materials indistinguishable. Not Hein was print pressed into Jaiwon's bowl. Just the bowl itself. Both of us in the object, inseparable now, the way things become when enough heat is applied. I set it on the wedging table. Stepped back. Good, I thought. That is good work. Hyunsoo appeared in the doorway. Looked at the bowl. Looked at me. It's beautiful, he said. It is, I agreed. He came in. Stood beside me. Both of us looking at the object the way people look at things that have earned the looking. His hand found mine at my side. Not reaching. Not pulling. Just present. Warm. The specific touch of someone who has finally decided that wanting something is not the same as being destroyed by it. I turned my hand over. Let his fingers settle between mine. The workroom around us. The Japanese maple outside the window finally catching winter light. The kiln still warm behind us. The bowl on the table. Jaiwon, he said. Just my name. The way it sounds when someone has made a decision about it. I looked up at him. And his eyes, open, fully open, the door not just cracked but removed from its hinges. Held something that had been building since a rainy drive from Seattle when he noticed which side dish I hadn't taken enough of and ordered materials for a studio before I arrived and wrote an exit clause for a person he hadn't met yet. Yes, I said, before he finished. Before he found the words. Because I had my grandmother's eyes. And I already knew. He leaned toward me and the cedar and warmth of him filled the air between us and I felt his breath against my jaw, my neck, and I did not move away. I held still the way you hold still when something is happening that you have been moving toward without naming it, and it has finally arrived. The workroom door opened. I pulled back by instinct. Hyunsoo straightened. Jay stood in the doorway. But it was not Jay's expression that stopped the air in the room. It was what he was holding. A photograph. Old. The glass cracked across one corner. The frame slightly warped from years pressed against a cold wall. The one I had found on the shelf and replaced exactly where I found it. Jay looked at me, then at the shelf where it had been, then back. "Where did you find this?" he said. His voice had lost every layer except the one underneath all of them. Raw. Stripped. "On the shelf," I said. "Lowest rack. Back against the wall." I replaced it exactly where it was. Jay looked at the photograph in his hands. Then he turned it over. And what was written on the back was not what I had read. I stepped forward. The handwriting I had seen was Hyunwoo. J. Hyunsoo. Portland, 2016. What Jay was looking at on the back of the frame I had held in my hands was different. Different handwriting. Newer. The ink not aged like the first inscription but recent, pressing hard into the paper the way urgent things get written. Jay's hand was shaking. "What does it say?" Hyunsoo asked from beside me, his voice dropping to the register it took when he was managing something he did not yet have the shape of. Jay looked up. His eyes found mine first. Those sharp, seeing too much eyes, and what was in them was not grief or relief or any of the emotions I had watched move through him since the entryway last night. It was something that had no clean name. Something that landed in the room like a stone into still water, sending its rings outward in every direction before the surface had time to settle. "It's not from 6 years ago," Jay said. "Then when?" Hyunsoo said. Jay looked at his brother. 2 days ago," he said. "The date is 2 days ago. The workroom. The kiln still warm. The bowl between us with its permanent fingerprint. And every careful system I had built around what I thought I understood about this house, this pack, and the reason I had been brought here cracked open all at once. Because if someone had written on the back of that photograph 2 days ago, the day before I arrived, then someone had known. Not suspected. Known. Who wrote it? I asked. Jay turned the photograph around and read the single line on the back in a voice so quiet it barely made it past his lips. "Bring him home." The workroom held its breath. The kiln ticked behind us as it cooled. And Hyunwoo's voice came from the doorway where he had been standing for how long I did not know, how long I had not heard, how long he had been there listening with those eyes that saw everything and filed it and had apparently 6 months before a debt deal and a contract signing and a drive from Seattle in the rain, made a plan that none of us had been given the full terms of. "You were never a practice," he said. "One heartbeat. 2. You were always the plan." Like, comment, subscribe and click on the notification bell. Thanks for watching.